So my name is Zainab Abouid. I'm 19 years old and I currently study the Bachelor's of Law and International Relations at La Trobe University. I partake in my local community by volunteering with local MPs such as Peter Khalil. I like to also attend and organise events that surround family violence to help ensure that women are heard and young women have voices. I wanted to represent myself as a Muslim woman and represent my community, so I thought why not start at a young age, so when I grow up perhaps I can be in Parliament one day. I feel like I should take advantage of these opportunities and make sure that I advocate on behalf of women, especially in my community that are subjected to family violence.
My name's Leslie. I have been with Moreland Family Daycare as an educator for over 36 years, I think. Family Daycare is a wonderful organisation. We look after children in our own home, they blend in with the family and it's fantastic.
I love Family Daycare.
I can choose my own hours, very flexible. I've made wonderful friendships with lots of the families. I'm now looking after children of the children I used to care for. The children just growing and developing is a wonderful, wonderful experience for me every day. I'd recommend Family Daycare to anybody and everybody. Oh, where's my Scouty snuggle? Where's my Scouty snuggle? Can I have a Scouty snuggle? How's your tea party going?
My name's Hilary. I've been with Moreland Family Daycare for 8 months now and I absolutely love it. The main reason I started with Family Daycare was to be with my little one. Family Daycare is a small environment, so mostly I only have 4 children and it's in a home. Moreland have been really supportive of the whole thing and they helped me find children when I first started. There's so many benefits of working in Family Daycare and becoming an educator. Working in your own home, flexible hours, also just watching the other children grow and being such a part of their life. I recommend to educators that want a good life balance if they have their own child. Family Daycare is a great avenue to go down.
Hey Moreland, today I'm down in St Kilda for the Midsummer Pride March supporting the LGBTQ community. It's a beautiful day. I'm proud to be here representing Moreland, walking behind so many wonderful dedicated people. This march goes towards exactly what our values are. At Moreland, we're one community proudly diverse.
More pride!
More pride! More pride! More pride! More pride! More pride!
I'm Moana Hope, most people call me Mo. I've grown up playing at Glenroy Football Club and now I play for Collingwood Football Club. I grew up in Glenroy, born and bred. My first year ever I played at Hatfield. From the second year all the way up to under 12 since Glenroy Football Club. I'm one of 14 and the reason why I got into it was my dad and my brothers. I used to watch all their games from the age of 3. It was community football, so it was the best type of football.
So proud.
Local footy is really important. I think, especially Glenmoree being the suburb and this being the main supplier of sports for the community. You look at what Glenmoree are trying to do here, they're trying to bring up a women's team and in the background is my niece who just finished under 12. So at the moment she hasn't got a pathway. So Melanie's played for Glenmoree from the same age as me, from the age of 7, and she is now too old to play boys football. So she's excited about the girls team, aren't you?
Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery and our viewers live streaming tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor John Kavanagh and I'm the Mayor of Moreland City Council. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's council meeting. Our meeting has been held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and elders from other communities who may be here tonight. I acknowledge that currently many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have made Moreland home. In doing so, they have contributed to the positive, rich diversity of our municipality. Members of the gallery, please note that the council meeting is being recorded and web streamed live to council's website and Facebook. This recording will also be available as video on demand. Gallery attendees are advised that they will be recorded during this meeting. Can I also acknowledge that in the gallery we have the Member for the Legislative Council for Northern Metropolitan Region and the State Leader of the Greens, Dr Samantha Ratton, and thanks for joining us. Councillors, just a reminder that in line with the adopted Councillor Code of Conduct principles, as outlined in the Councillor Code of Conduct, councillors should ensure that they conduct themselves in the meeting with integrity, impartially exercising their responsibilities in the interests of the local community, and not improperly seek or confer or advantage any person. This behaviour will support principles for leadership and good governance that secures public confidence in the office of councillor. Members of the gallery, in the event of emergency or disruption, we may be required to take action to ensure the safety of attendees. Please follow the directions issued by council staff and security officers. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. I'd like to introduce the councillors in attendance tonight, starting from my far right, your left, Councillor Sue Bolton. How's it going? Councillor Anna-Olivia Carley-Hannon. Good evening. Councillor Helen Davidson. Good evening. The Deputy Mayor, Councillor Natalie Abood. Councillor Ali Farnley. Good evening. Councillor Dale Martin. Councillor Mark Riley. Councillor Lambros Tapanos. And Councillor Oscar Yildiz. Immediately to my left, your right, is a Chief Executive Officer, Marina Di Lorenzo. We also have, moving from my right, your left, we have other council officers in attendance. We have the Director of City Infrastructure, Grant Thorne, the Director of Social Development, Arden Joseph, the Director of Planning and Economic Development, Kirsten Costa. On this side, starting from nearest to me, is the Director of the Director of Corporate Services, Director of Corporate Services, James Scott, the Unit Manager of Governance, Sally Curran, the Manager of Property and Governance, Olivia Wright, and the Executive Manager of Organisational Development, Anita Craven. Councillors, I think we are all in attendance tonight, so there'll be no apologies. Councillors, I've asked for a declaration of conflicts of interest. I do have one to declare tonight, conflict of interest on DCI 6817. It involves granting of a parking permit to Moira Kelly Foundation, and Moira Kelly is my first cousin, and so therefore I will be declaring a conflict in that report, and at that time I'll be asking for the Deputy Mayor to take the chair. Are there any other conflicts of interest, councillors? No, there being no further ones. We have a special part of the ceremony tonight. The Victorian Electoral Commission conducted a countback to fill the extraordinary vacancy created by the resignation of Councillor Samantha Ratnam. Ms Jess Dorney was duly elected on Wednesday the 22nd of November 2017. As required by the Local Government Act 1989, I invite now the Chief Executive Officer to facilitate the swearing in of Councillor-elect Jess Dorney. In addition to taking an affirmation of office, Councillor-elect Dorney will also be asked to make a declaration she has read and will abide by the Councillor Code of Conduct. Thank you, Chief Executive.
I, Jess Dorney, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that I will undertake the duties of the Office of Councillor in the best interests of the people in the Municipal District of Moreland and faithfully and impartially carry out my functions, powers and authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1989 or any other act to the best of my skill and judgment.
Now invite you to make a declaration relating to the Code of Conduct.
I hereby declare that I've read the Councillor Code of Conduct for Moreland City Council adopted on the 20th of February 2017 and declare that I will abide by this code.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present Councillor Jess Dorney.
Congratulations, Councillor. I invite you now to say a few words and, of course, to join us in the meeting.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I'd just like to say that I'm thrilled and really excited to be on Moreland City Council as a councillor, a Greens councillor for that matter. I'm a Brunswick local, East Brunswick local. You know, I really love living in the community. I've worked locally. I have a public health promotion background, so I bring that perspective to the team here at Moreland. And yeah, I really look forward to serving the community in the best interests, and looking forward to what's next.
Thank you very much, Councillor. On behalf of my fellow councillors, I sincerely congratulate you on your election. I'm sure you'll find the role to be an exciting one and a privilege, an opportunity that should not be taken for granted. We look forward to getting to know you better, and I'm sure every councillor will join with me in saying they're happy to assist you in any way possible. It's a steep learning curve, but I'm sure, I can assure you, you're joining a group of committed people and committed to improving our city. So thank you very much. And in doing so, can I ask a councillor for, can I have a motion for the adoption of the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November 2017? Moved by Councillor Abood, seconded by Councillor Davison. Any discussion? Being no discussion, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Petitions by councillors. Councillors, do you have any petitions? I believe Councillor Tapanos, do you have Orient Grove Brunswick parking petition? No?
Yes, I don't have it physically with me, but I believe that was submitted to governance.
Has that been submitted? Yeah, I believe that's fine.
If it hasn't already been submitted, we'll get
that. We'll do that. Fine, okay. Good. Are there any other petitions from councillors? Are there any petitions from anyone in the gallery tonight? Okay. There being no further petitions, could I have a mover to accept the petition moved by Councillor Tapanos? Could I have a seconder for that? Thanks. Councillor Bolton. And any discussion? Being no discussion, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay. Question time. This is an opportunity for 30 minutes for the citizens of Moreland to raise questions with Council. I'd like to outline the process. Please note that if your question relates to a matter that is on any of the officer reports or the notice of motion, this is the time to raise the question now. A maximum of 2 questions is allowed per person. A maximum of 3 questions will be heard on any one subject. Council will then proceed to the next subject, returning to the previous subject if time allows. If your question cannot be answered, it will be taken on notice and responded to between now and the next council meeting. If a response to your question is provided at tonight's meeting, there will be no formal response. However, council will action any commitments made in answering the question. We have 30 minutes and I want to make sure we hear as many questions as possible, so I ask that we don't enter into debate during this time, and you'll be given time to inform council of the context of the question, but I ask that you get to your question as quickly as possible. Also, councillors will only be accepting 1 answer to each question from either a councillor or an officer, and we should address the questions succinctly. So the commencement time is 7:09 and we have 30 minutes. And our first question is from Antonio Perry from Brunswick.
Evening. Question first, then context?
I'll let you go either way.
Okay.
Always brief.
In regards to DCI 6917 unconstructed laneways, why were relevant environmental and engineering policies and strategies not considered in the report? And will you include them in the report? Because you've got some policies listed that you've considered. You haven't considered your open space strategy in turning permeable unmade laneways, open space, into unpermeable space. So you haven't considered your open space strategy, your stormwater management plan, volumes 1 and 2, your urban heat island effect action plan, your urban forest strategy, your water sensitive urban design, Melbourne water, etc., and Moreland water map 2020. I can quote to you from some of these. You got goals in your open strategy of making places for nature, goal 3, goal 4, a greener, more livable Moreland, anyway. Your stormwater management plan, T1, review the road assets management strategy, part 9, and consider incorporating water sensitive urban design techniques where possible. In 6.1.7, it talks about porous pavements, structural stormwater treatment methods, involve building structures such as litter traps, porous pavements or wetlands, etc., to reduce runoff volumes. We've just had the floods of the weekend, and we also have extreme heat as well. You've got your urban heat island effect action plan. Just in the introduction, urban heat island is driven by a number of key factors. Your first dot point, a high percentage of solid surfaces, e.g. asphalt and concrete. This is your report. Limited vegetation. There has been talk of turning laneways, unused laneways, into parks. You've got water sensitive urban design, and you've got Moreland Water Map 2020. In your executive summary, the vision of Moreland Water Map 2020 is for the City of Moreland to become a water sensitive city, in which council leads by example and supports community actions to manage water resources in an environmentally, socially and financially responsible manner. And there you've got is it O3 or Q3 or something? Yeah. Implement water sensitive urban design into all council capital works projects. So okay. I think it's been missed, and the report could be significant.
I think we've got the gist of your question. All right. Is any councillor like to take it? Okay, could I ask the Director of City Infrastructure?
Thank you for the question, Antonia. The intent of the report was to answer a question that councillors asked about the unmade laneways. The report sets out, the distances of lanes that are unmade, and then those that might be required for access and permeability of the movement network. The report does not go the next step, which you're talking about permeable paving, etc. That would be a further consideration down the track if those particular unmade laneways were to be made, or whatever, what form that would actually take. So whether it be permeable or include landscaping, etc., would be a consideration further down the track, not at this point in time.
Just in the report, it actually says concrete or asphalt, with the two options given.
Through the chair.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm happy to take. Would you want to say that?
Through the Mayor, as you'd be aware, Antonio, there was a long process undertaken over a number of years to look at the Bluestone laneway network, and there was a report at December 2015, I think it was, or 16, 15 I think it was, that adopted a design method which was a permeable pavement, as you'd be aware. So if we move down some paths, it would be consideration of that. In order to make a laneway that can be used by traffic, etc., it needs to be of a certain strength.
Okay, thank you very much.
So you'll consider the policies in future reports?
I think you've had a okay. If you take a seat, I will ask you that question. Would you just summarise that?
Through the Mayor, as I explained, this is a first step about opening up laneways for accessibility of movement. If a laneway was to be constructed under whether it be a special charge or council constructing it, those other factors which you mentioned would be considered as part of how that laneway was then dealt with in that second step.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you for your interest. Okay, we only have one more question tonight, councillors, which is not on the agenda but has been on a previous agenda. So, Damien Walsh at Mitchell Street, Brunswick. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you, councillors. The two questions I had was, has council contacted residents in the Mitchell Street permit zone as contemplated in the report 13/9/2007 agenda? And for reference, it was that report.
Yes, yeah.
And secondly, when will council fix the parking in Mitchell Street?
Right.
Probably
Thank you
more
very
of
much,
an open
Damien.
question.
Yep, I do know the report you're referring to.
Yes.
I don't know if they've been contacted. Can I refer to the director?
Through the Mayor, I'm not sure off the top of my head, Damien, but given you're asking the question, I'm assuming the answer is no, but I'll have an officer follow that up and contact you directly with an answer to that.
Yeah. Could we get you, at the end of this, could we get your phone number there, Damien, as well? All right. Okay. You've got another question? Yeah.
As I said, generally, when will the council fix the parking? Would it be possible to speak to the council just generally the background to this issue?
That's all right. As long as it can take a couple of minutes for us, all right?
I've lived in Brunswick for near on 20 years, in Mitchell Street for 19, and parking has been an issue there ever since there was a very famous and popular restaurant around the corner. At the time, to address that issue, council installed permit parking in the first 100 metres of the street. Since then, there seems to be a very large increase in the number of people living in the apartments that are actually in that half of the street. They have a choice. They can buy permits or they can park in our end of the street where there is no permit. As a result, probably 99% of the time, all the parking spaces in the non-permit end of the street are actually taken. If we move our cars in the evening, if we use it to take our children anywhere or do anything like that, inevitably there'll be no parking there when we come back. I noticed in the report that said it has been reported that residents who do not have parking restrictions outside of property have needed to park in the restricted areas and have received an infringement notice. That was myself.
Right.
Because we returned from taking our kids to swimming lessons one night, there was no parking anywhere near our house. We had to park in the other area, which is a permit zone, which is usually about 85% empty, and then we got booked. The problem is exacerbated in our part of the street because only 3 of the properties in our half of the street actually have off-street parking, and it's not possible for us to get them. We've discussed this with the council. In my case, there is a space where the council would allow us to have a crossover. We discussed this about 10 years ago. Unfortunately, there is a power pole there, and City Power's quoted as over $20,000 to move that pole. So there's no practical alternative. The petition which came to council in April was or in fact, nearly all of the residents of the unrestricted part of the street. And the residents of the restricted, and I noticed in here it said that this would mean that the people in the restricted part of the street, non-restricted part of the street, would end up paying for permits. We fully understood that.
Yes.
Everybody who signed that was happy to do that just to resolve the problem. Because, for example, I'm being told that I have neighbours who work night shifts and they're having to park in Donald Street, in Linwood Crescent, walk back through the park at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's simply no parking in that area.
I'm going to hold you there, Damien, but thank you for the way in which you've asked the question and the informative way in which you've informed council. I'm sure that we'll be actioning that. From memory, I think it was a notice of motion.
Yeah, it was
a notice of motion.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll ensure that that is actioned, and thank you very much.
So the residents who asked me to come speak
Yes.
and do the thing, we're very happy for that to become a full permit zone.
I understand. All right,
Because
thank you
it's
so
the
much.
only way it's going to solve the parking. At the moment, you've got people who, units there which were built post-2011.
Yes.
They are, so for example, the one opposite my house, if they move to as they come out their door, if they move to the west, they need a permit.
Yeah.
If they come to the east, they don't. You can guess where they're parking.
Understand. Thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now, actually, councillors, that actually concludes the questions that we had submitted tonight. All right, so we'll move on to the next item, which is on notice items from the previous council meeting. And could I have a motion to receive the on notice items held for the meeting on the 15th of November, and note that on notice item 1317, car stackers by Ms Drummond has been responded to in the intervening. Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Could I have a seconder? And thank you, Councillor Bolton. All those in favour of receiving those items? Against, declare that carried. Reports by Mayor and Councillors. Mayor and Councillor reports a report on the activities from councillors in relation to events, activities, meetings or other functions that council has been attended between council meetings. All reports by Mayor and Councillors will appear in the minutes of the meeting. I'll now ask each councillor in turn if they wish to provide a report tonight. Would you like to, Councillor? We'll start the other side. Councillor Yildiz, would you like to start?
I think we attended the Merri-bek Historical Society event on Sunday. Besides that, I think it was there. There may have been other events, I haven't noted them down. So
That's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Councillor Yildiz. Councillor Tapanos?
Mr. Mayor, it's going to be a long evening, so I'll run it tight.
That's fine. Thank you for your understanding. Dito, yes?
Thanks.
Yeah.
I've got one thing to say. Well, because if I say everything that I've been doing on behalf of our
Yes,
esteemed
I know.
mayor, I'll be here for a year.
Yes.
One thing just to feedback, which is to do with the absolutely delightful Christmas parties that have been happening for the elderly sits in the hall for the last 2 days, which a delightful man said to me over his Christmas pudding and custard, I absolutely love this Christmas party. It's better than last year, and he absolutely loves the Meals on Wheels and loves the women coming to, except he called them girls, because when you're an old man you call everybody a girl. Loved having the girls come and couldn't speak highly enough of the whole thing. So I said to him, there's a council meeting tomorrow, I'm going to relay that back so everybody knows that Meals on Wheels is great and these young women that are helping you get good dinners are credited. So.
Councillor Dunn, you all right? And Councillor Davidson, did you want to? No. Councillor Callaghan? Councillor Bolton?
I did just want to say one brief thing. There was a meeting which Councillor Ali Farnley initiated, which John Kavanagh, the Mayor, John Kavanagh and myself attended, about a new estate, a relatively new estate in Fawkner, with streets which are only 5.5 metres wide. And I'm raising this in public because I gather that this is the new format for all new estates across Melbourne. And this is an insanely narrow street width, which I think really jeopardises safety in terms of fire engine access, given that most cars, unless you've got a small car, are about 1.8 metres wide. And so you can sort of imagine the problem. The streets in Brunswick, which people think of as being very narrow, are actually wide compared to the Medina Estate streets. And anyway, it's something which really council has to really look at, not just, some things the council can do to alleviate residents' concerns, but some things we won't be able to because it's already been built 7 years ago, but it's something for us to consider for the future. And I might leave it there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bolton, and thanks, Councillor O'Farley, for organising that meeting too. It's very good. All right, okay, councillors, we move on to the presentation of officer reports, and we begin tonight with Planning and Economic Development Directorship. All right, so we have DED 10717, Moreland Heritage Gap and Amendment Decision Gateway 1 Authorisation and Exhibition. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Farnley, seconded by Councillor Riley. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Farnley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a report that essentially looks to go to public consultation in regards to adding additional heritage homes and precincts to the heritage overlay. I am satisfied that with the report and its findings, and look forward to hearing from the community in regards to feedback in regards to the heritage overlay precincts that will be added and homes that will be added to the heritage overlay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Riley.
Yeah, just need to add to it, Mayor Kavanagh, that many of the people who submitted to this heritage study, your concerns won't have been incorporated in this study because the resources didn't extend that far. However, if you read the report closely, you'll understand that we are actually going to process those submissions in a further stage. So, like many of the things council do, they're quite complex in the undertaking, and we will be taking another stage of that. So, please bear with us and please stay tuned to the next steps and look at the report in terms of how we're going to resource that in the coming year and the year's budget to make sure that we actually consider all of those proposals, because we value every contribution and we understand the significance of heritage and the importance people place on it in their place. So we want to keep Moreland, keep what's good about Moreland and keep developing it. So thank you so much for those who have made a submission. Please pay attention to that.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Any other councillor like to speak to this report? Being no further discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay, we move to DED 10817, planning zones, properties without specific height guidance, and Councillor Abood would like to move the item. Do we have a seconder?
I have a small amendment for
Okay.
point 3.
All right, Councillor Martin, you can move with, yep.
So just that it reads, the point 3 reads, receives a further report in December 2018 that recommends appropriate blah, 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 and continues on.
And you're okay with that, Councillor?
Potentially buy, maybe buy.
Oh yeah, sorry, buy is fine. Yep.
Okay, and that's what's been moved, and you're happy to second that?
Yes.
Okay, right. So, would you like to talk to it?
Just to note that this was the result of a notice of motion that I put forward that was sort of triggered by what happened at Stewart Street, which is very close to Ceres. And also to note that the decision to reject the development at Stewart Street was upheld by VCAT. And so I'm sort of glad to see that this report has acknowledged that, yes, there are anomaly areas in the city, and I hope that we can get them resolved very quickly before this is an issue for another developer and also for the city itself and the residents. You know, it's quite an exhausting scenario to have to object so heavily to something that just doesn't fit in a neighbourhood, and it's expensive, and unless you're a lawyer, it's complicated. So I'm just happy to acknowledge that this has come back so quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Abood. Councillor Martin?
Yeah, and just following on from what Councillor Abood has said, we acknowledge that our planning department have a hell of a lot of work on at the moment, and so we have given them, we've just brought that forward by an extra 6 months because it's something that is really important to us here. We don't want to be going to VCAT for all of these cases for arguing what we should be changing and amending. So looking forward, hopefully we'll be able to get this done and work with DELP to really resolve these issues for the residents. Thanks.
Any other councillors like to speak to this item? Being no further discussion, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. DED 109/17, mandatory height controls for Brunswick and Coburg activities.
I'm happy to move this.
I've got Councillor Riley on his feet, but I'll take him as the mover, and I'll take Councillor Bolton as the seconder. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Kavanagh. I just would like to move the motion as read, but I would like to move that we delete clause 1 as in my motion. So if Councillor Bolton is prepared to accept that, and I'll just if Sue's there, I'll just briefly speak to that, which is I just feel this the note here at the top is number 1, and it doesn't seem to me it could be something that we've taken as read, and it may actually be something that's worth noting, but I don't know that it needs to be noted in a recommendation of this stature. That's why I'm concerned at appearing there. The other issue,
all other numbers,
all the other numbers to stay, just to stay, renumber them.
Yep.
Obviously, you know, I don't think it changes for me, I don't think it changes the weight of this motion. I think the substance of it is still there, and it's important and acknowledge the work that Council is doing and the
Can I just check, Councillor Bolton, you're happy to second that as it is? Yep, sorry, go on.
I think it's good.
Yep, thank you. So just to acknowledge that, and you know, I think if we are going to do this, that we need to actually look at some of the other factors that are where there are differences and similarities between our neighbouring municipalities. I think it would be good to get a sort of a much more sort of complete picture in that sense. Height is one of them, but I think there are many other things that come into play here, and so I think if we wanted to do that, I'd prefer it if we actually had a slightly rounder picture around not just the height, even though I know height is one of the things that we keep having to come back to. So yes, so I think otherwise I'm happy with the intention of the motion and the work that Council staff have put into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Bolton.
I strongly support this. I think Council should engage in a campaign to win mandatory height controls for the Brunswick and Coburg activity centres. Unfortunately, mandatory height controls were pulled from the planning amendment that Moreland put forward in in the term of the last council. They were pulled by the planning panel, by the planning minister actually in the end. I think this is quite critical. It's obviously not the only issue in terms of development in Moreland, but I really strongly feel that if residents have to have any confidence in any kind of public consultation processes in Moreland or anywhere, people need to know that what they put forward in public consultation that council votes on is going to be binding, and I think that's what mandatory height controls are all about. You know, very lengthy periods of public consultation and different types of proposals were put forward to people in both Brunswick and Coburg. And, you know, since I've been in the Urban Planning Committee this year, you know, quite frequently there are applications by developers to go above the height limit that people debated and discussed in the community for many years. And I just think this is, and each developer that does it justifies it on the basis that a previous developer managed to get an agreement from Moreland Council to go above the height limit. And they all try and find little ways of justifying it. Well, if we give you this, then we could have an extra metre or an extra story or something here and there. It's good to get the statistics on how many applications have been approved or have been applied for, which will go above the mandatory height limits. I think that information is really important for the community. But anyway, I mean, there's no guarantee that the Minister will grant this to us, but I think this is a state election year. I think we should be trying to win support from all of the parties for mandatory height controls.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Tucker.
I also rise to speak in favour of the officer's recommendations here. Councillors, as a council and the previous council, we've done a lot of work in regards to strategic planning and trying to get better planning outcomes for our residents. But we acknowledge that there is still a long way to go. And one of the key gaps in planning laws is this one issue that we've been grappling with for over 10 years, and that is the word mandatory instead of discretionary in our height controls. So it's good to see that we're not being idle and we're continuing to advocate and lobby the government to get this change. I'm not quite sure what outcomes will be produced from the state government's Activity Centre pilot program, but certainly in the interim and also hopefully beyond that, we are able to achieve mandatory controls in our activity centres. It is something that's been rejected on multiple occasions, but I do think that it's something that we need to continue to pursue. Just a few comments in regards to why we are seeing such densities along Sydney Road in particular, but also Lygon Street and Nicholson Street now. It is because there is uncertainty. It is because developers have a go at seeking ambit claims and then trying to get more and more as they go through the process, through officers, through the Urban Planning Committee, and then ultimately through VCAT and even the Minister. So what this will do is provide certainty to both the developers about what is and isn't acceptable, but certainty more importantly to our residents. And it would lead to significant height reductions in our municipality, and it would lead to a type of development that our residents really want to see, a development which is what they saw and what they spoke to us about during the consultation periods, not something that is 1 story higher or 2 stories higher or even more. So I do think that this is a really, really key issue and we need to continue the fight, and I'm sure we would win it in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Any other councillors like to speak to this motion? Being no further discussion, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. DD 11017, a park close to home, a framework to fill open space gaps, outcomes of consultation and final draft for adoption. Councillor Abood is the mover. Could I have a seconder before you?
Yep.
I gather you're moving the officer recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bolton? Sorry, I missed that. Called Councillor Bolton now. Yep.
So I just wanted to actually commend this work. It had a couple of fits and starts, but then what happened is opened it up for consultation to the public, and the public well and truly came to the party. So we had 32 submissions, and I really want to acknowledge, I'll just read this. Feedback received was very detailed, comprehensive and helpful from the final framework with many constructive suggestions and recommendations for improvement. Common themes from the feedback included that council changes, etc., etc. But I just want to acknowledge that tribute is paid about the consultation that we received from the residents, and that this framework has actually led to a scenario where we're trying to organise a public participation policy within the council, just to encourage these kind of more, fluid conversations between what we can do from in here and what actually needs to be done from out there. And I just wanted to also acknowledge that refining some of the detail here to determine the walkability of these green spaces to a person's home has actually identified 2 new gap areas in Glenroy. One of them is because where we thought there was a way through, there actually wasn't. And so I think just that this has been really valuable. I also wanted to commend the Brunswick Residents Network for a pretty informative forum that they put on that was very well attended and a crucial part of determining feedback about this work and showing people what actually is involved. So I'm just quite proud to be able to move this report, and I think it's a good outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Councillor Bolton.
Well, I think this report is really a culmination of a very long residents' campaign over many years, and there's been a yearning for more open space, and then I think some of the residents actually started to put some work into coming up with ideas and so forth for how the council could address it. And then I also think it was really good that when this did come to council, that we, rather than just rushing into adopting something, we gave it a bit of extra time for public consultation, because I think that meant that we came up with a much, much better report. I think the council officers have also done a good job. I think the map of where the gaps are is very, very interesting. And it's been much, much improved by that public consultation. I'm also looking forward to what I gather is going to be another report, which is going to be looking at the state of the various open spaces, because certainly from Coburg North residents who live in the industrial estate, there was a feeling, especially after the initial version of Park Close to Home, that their area had been ignored. And they raised something which is raised in the report, is it's also not just a question of having an open space, it's the quality of that open space. And I certainly notice as I go around Moreland that the open spaces that are visited are really the pleasant spaces where there's a lot of trees, unless it's a more sporting ground, and open spaces where really it's sparse, there's no trees, there's nothing there, often not many people go to. And I think in the Coburg North area, I think that is, and a resident sent me a lovely graphic of what could be, how one of their open spaces could be changed to be much more attractive and visitable, and it's not the only part of Moreland like that as well. So I look forward to that other report as well about improving the quality, but I certainly agree with us passing this this resolution tonight and getting on with trying to acquire those open spaces before prices of property go up even further.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Any other councillors like to speak to it? Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Thank you. Place action plans for DED 1117, place action plans for Glenroy, Coburg and Brunswick activity centres. Moved by Councillor, you're moving the officer recommendation? That's right. You happy to second that? Councillor Abood. So moved by Councillor Parnley, seconded by Councillor Abood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to, with your indulgence, firstly thank the Economic Development team for putting together this report. It really encapsulates what's going on in the 3 activity centres of Glenroy, Coburg and Brunswick in a fairly well condensed report. It comes back to Council on an annual basis to inform the community of what we're doing within our activity centres. And look, I'm sure councillors around the table would agree with me that the best activity centre, which is Coburg, has got a lot going on. We're very excited about some of the projects coming up within that particular activity centre and look forward to progress over the next 12 months and being informed of that. So thank you for the Economic Development team for putting together this report.
Thank you, Councillor Farnley. Councillor Abood.
I just wanted to draw attention to what I think, one of the things that I think Councillor Farnley is talking about, which is the activation of the back entrance of the City Oval. There's a beautiful avenue of trees back there, and I know that it's not the first part of the work that will be done on this site, but there's a great plan to open up the back side of the oval so that it's accessible and you don't have to climb through a hole in the fence. But I'd also like to draw attention to point 3, which is endorsing the preferred alternative location for the replacement toilet at the Coburg Activity Centre, which has come out of something that I put forward to replace the Exeloo with a proper toilet. And something that has been really beneficial that was drawn to our attention the other day when we were all taken for a walk through Coburg to see what the plans were for this area is that currently across the across the mall from the library, there's no water. Putting a toilet on that site, yes, we'll lose 2 car parks, but what it means is water will be brought to the site, and it means that there will be able to be a more substantial garden constructed there. So the pigeons have pretty much been moved on from those wires that we sort of couldn't walk under them before. But now I like the idea that having the toilet located at that site means that it'll be close to the mall, close to the library, and potentially have some garden created there just by the very design that it needs to have water added to it. So I'm quite happy with the outcomes of this.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Riley.
I just want to add one further comment. Thank you to Councillor Farnley and Councillor Wood for those comments. But just to say that this affects 3 key areas, Glenroy, Coburg and Brunswick, and I would recommend that if you're interested in either of those areas that you read them, because they are a comprehensive picture of what's going to happen or what is happening and what will happen very soon in those suburbs. And I wish I had this document 12 months ago when I began my work, so I'm hoping with my colleague in the South Ward that we can use those to explain more about what is going on in our city and the investments we're making. So I'd really just encourage people to keep them handy because they're a very useful tool, I think, and I want to commend the officers for all the work they've done on it.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Bolton.
There's one point that I'd like to raise in case for people who might not have read this report, and that is to prioritise Louisa Street for the next streetscape upgrade works. Now, Louisa Street's the part that's outside opposite Woolworths or beside Woolworths in Coburg. This is really important because this area doesn't have a footpath. Sort of 21st century, and an area like this, which intersects with car parks on both sides of the road, and there's no actual defined footpath, makes it quite scary because obviously people who live on that side of the Coburg shopping centre are more likely to walk to the Woolworths rather than the other end, Waterfield Street, where there is a footpath, and it's quite scary for people to cross, people who might not be very nimble because they're elderly or have a disability or illness of some kind or managing a number of little kids. So I'd like to see this brought as far forward as we possibly can in terms of design and construction. But I note that this is better than what was reported to Council previously for Louisa Street, which was more like waiting until 2020 or 2021. So I'm very pleased to see this beginning to be designed next year.
Is there any other councillor that would like to talk on this issue? I believe Councillor Farley would like to close the debate as the member.
Just a quick correction. It was actually the Places team that put this together, not the Economic Development team. So thank you to the Places team.
Okay, no worries. Okay, and put that to the vote then. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. We move to DED 112/17, Better Planning Development Outcomes. Councillor Martin.
So I wish to move an amended motion on this item.
Okay, can you just read the motion and we'll see if we get a second to it.
So essentially, what I'm wanting to do is to really strengthen our resolve in the creation of a design review panel and utilising design review panel. So if the amended motion, that's not it. But I'll talk to it in the meantime. So essentially, we're dropping down from 4 points to 3, continuing the 12-month trial of an additional urban design officer. But the wording I've amended slightly to refocus, looking at the fast track design review panel process. And I guess if I have a seconder, I'm happy
that's
to
right. All right, so
talk to it.
if you clarify for councillors what
Can you read out the exact amendment?
Yeah,
It should come up.
We might wait for it to come up. I know it's going to take, but it might do so.
It's a
just
little bit
so
long,
everyone
so
is clear.
probably just
so everyone's clear.
But I'll read it out if we're waiting. So the first point is point 1. Note the outcomes of the roundtable as outlined in attachment 1 to the report. So that's the same as what it was previously to this report. And note that the overall feedback from the roundtable was for council to consider a fast-track design review panel mechanism to improve the quality of development in Moreland. The second point being proceed with the recommendations of NOM 5016 that was endorsed by council and as included in the council plan to establish and implement a new design review panel in 2017-18 and commence the preparation of quality development scorecard project brief to test the feasibility as part of the design review panel process and operation. And the third point is quite similar to the last point, considering a 12-month trial of an additional urban design officer to establish the design review panel and potential new fast-track process for high-quality applications. So I'm happy to talk to it if I do have a seconder.
Right. Okay, Councillor Riley is seconding. Yes, you may speak to it now.
So what I'm really wanting to do here is to really strengthen our resolve towards looking at a design review panel, and I feel like the recommendations may have slightly stepped away from the design review panel. What I really want to see Moreland is to be put up on a pedestal for design excellence. I want to see Moreland having the top ESD, well-built, homes of the future that are fully accessible, that are really exceptional. I don't want to walk past an apartment in 20 years' time and think, oh, that went up. The people in there can't pay their energy bills and they're living there in this hotbox rubbish apartments. And really, we have an excellent planning department, but what this design review panel process will really do is really strengthen that. And I'm certain that, in 20 years' time, if we're able to get this process down pat and fine-tuned with the scorecard or however it looks going forward, we're not going to be walking past these horrible buildings, but we're actually going to be bringing people into the city to do tours of these amazing buildings. So I really do urge councillors to support this alternative, looking at the design review panel process.
The second amendment.
Yes, look, thank you, Councillor Martin. I just would like to add that I've been part of these processes with the Urban Environment Committee and the Roundtable Forum, and not all councillors have been there, but I believe it would be really useful in the future when we're continuing this work that we all participate, particularly as we're all part of the Urban Planning Committee, and these issues all connect and relate. So I know officers have struggled with this work. It's really difficult, and given that we have a performance-based planning system, I think it's unique. Well, it is unique in the world, but there are very few systems that use the kind of planning schemes that we use in Victoria, and it came in around the Kennett era, and we've been living with the results ever since. What's produced is a much more complex, far more complex planning scheme than anyone ever envisaged. And what we're trying to do, as Councillor Martin said, is to try and find ways to encourage better design and better outcomes in terms of what's being tabled with the planning department, and to make life better for all of the citizens, but also for the officers and for councillors in terms of getting high quality designs and proposals that actually excite the community, that actually inspire us as a place to live, rather than getting much of the kind of thing we're getting on a daily basis, which is pretty ordinary and not very future-proofing in terms of our future generations and grandchildren, what sorts of buildings and design, urban designs that we're going to be living in. So this is really important. I know we're struggling, so I just hope that we can proceed along this line to try and work out a way of getting those tools, whatever they might look like. Councillor Martin referred to some of them, that we can try and get those tools right and actually make these processes a little bit easier for everybody with a bit more inspiration for all of us. Thank you.
A question?
Yes, you can.
I'd like to ask Councillor Martin if you can explain the implications of the adopting a fast-track method. I note in the report it says that generally its fast-track system is only considered where applications are not advertised, and that this fast-tracking appears to be when community consultation happens. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit further exactly the implications on community consultation.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond, and the answer is that this process hasn't been ironed out yet. We don't know what this process is actually going to look like. When talking to developers, really there's two levers that you've got as a council to try and incentivise really good development, and that is dollars and time. And so hopefully with a fast track process, and whatever that looks like, you know, that's up to the design review panel, that's up to officers to develop that and bring that back to us. But what it does is it says, if you're going to provide us this really exceptional building, so this building which everyone in the municipality wants to live in, what it does is it actually speeds up the process for them, so they're actually able to deliver this in a quicker turnaround, so then they can move on to more projects, and that offers them the incentive to provide really good development in the municipality. And so in answering your question, I don't think we've got the process ironed out. And I think it's something that's going to move forward over time.
Just before you do, Councillor Bolton, I also have a question. I'd like to ask the Director a question. I'm just reading the original officer report and the motion that's been moved. Could you give us an idea of the financial implications of endorsing this motion rather than what's in the officer report?
Thank you. Through the Mayor. The report discusses options for how design panels work, and the panels that are typically in train across Australia would generate in the order of $145,000 expense to council if it's run that way. So not knowing exactly how this panel will work means that we're not clear exactly on that price value, but in terms of if the panel is being used to inform decisions and just on big projects, which is typically how they're used, it would be in the order of $145,000 for council. Hence, when in the report there's a discussion around if the feedback sought for medium density housing, that you don't have design review panels for that. You have urban designers who provide that input, right, which is where we got to with the trial.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Bolton, did you have anything?
I think I'm going to speak against the amended motion. I think I would be happy with the original officer's recommendation. I'm nervous about a fast track for getting supposedly better design. If there's better building design, then theoretically there should be less objections, so you don't need fast track. I sort of feel like a lot of these fast track options, which sometimes council has had to intervene in, like the fast tracking of the sale of the Houghton Avenue land and various fast tracking that's been adopted by the current state government and previous state governments. Often it sort of reduces the rights of the community to have a say to really properly look at things. I think if the design is so great, there won't be many objections, and so it will be fast tracked anyway. I'm very nervous that a fast-tracking system, which, while I'm sure Councillor Martin's got very good intentions, sometimes there are things that we don't anticipate, we don't fully appreciate because maybe we don't live in the vicinity, which, you know, the community consultation, all of that can stop us from making a bad decision. So I'm just really reluctant to agree to any kind of fast tracking. especially as often developers try to trade off one thing for the other thing. We'll put in this nice little measure in order for, something else which might not be so good. So, I mean, I think I'm against any kind of fast tracking without seeing clearly what the process is in advance.
Just a point of clarification, Councillor. Are you foreshadowing that this is unsuccessful? You'll move the officer recommendation?
Foreshadow, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, look, I'm a fan of good governance, and unfortunately these changes have been emailed through an hour before tonight's meeting, and I'm just not clear exactly what the implications are for these type of amendments. I do know that the report isn't recommending a design review panel. I think, however, I have great respect for Councillor Martin and his intentions. So what I would actually like to do is talk about this with him further before we move any type of motion. I'd call it procedural to defer this item so we can talk with the council officers. To defer it so the council officers can take a look at what Councillor Martin's put on the table, and we can balance it out.
Okay, it's a procedural motion to defer, and you don't need a seconder, so we're going to put that to the vote. Councillor Farley's procedural motion to defer the item. I'm going to put that to the vote now. All those in favour of a deferral? All those against? Okay, I've declared that procedural motion of a deferral carried, and so we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much. All right. Okay. We move on to the next item. We move into social development, and we have DSD 5017 Draft Aquatic and Leisure Strategy 2018-2038, and Councillor Carly Hannon is on her feet. Moved by are you moving the officer recommendation?
Yes, I am.
Yes, and Councillor Abood is happy to second the officer recommendation.
Okay.
You have the floor.
I'd like to begin by thanking the officers and all the councillors and the community for the work that's gone in to this strategy. I'd also like to note that it's a 6-pool strategy. Applause for that. And that we are really considering the investment into our pools and the importance that every single one of our pools provides as infrastructure to our community, servicing with different needs, particularly noting Merri-bek Leisure Centre as a future major facility, being a point in which it services the south parts of Bell Street, recognising the growth that we've mentioned with the places for the activity centre around Coburg, and the important future that Coburg is going to have for the growth that we're going to see in Moreland. I also want to note that it's a departure from Council's history. We have seen a lack of maintenance and a lack of investment in ensuring that our assets do not decline. And so we hope to see in the future that when investing in our pools, we're also going to be putting aside the money to actually maintain what we've put the money into in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Abood.
Yes, I completely agree with Councillor Carly Hannon, and not to specify a lack of maintenance and a lack of investment for the last 60 years, which is quite a long time to let something fall into ruin. I wanted to draw attention to the fact that this is a draft and it's going out for consultation, and I know that there are people listening very closely who will consult with us about this strategy, and I want to reiterate what I said about the park close to home, and the feedback that we need to get from the community is vital to this being a success. And I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that some of us think that the strategy could be a bit more aspirational. I know for me personally, I was feeding back from the community that people thought the Coburg Olympic pool could be solar heated, or at one stage there was a very high aspiration that it could be Australia's first ever natural pool, which was filtered by plants, and this is like right outside the box, and it was one of my many tin pot ideas. But I just wanted to reiterate how important it is to have voices from the community, and that people will get their submissions in by the 18th of February and then be prepared to talk to them so that we can know exactly what's required. But I also wanted to thank the officers for their really diligent work. And I've been able to tour all of the pools and go into the plant rooms and get a really hands-on look at exactly which pools are cracked in half and what's going on where, and see the amazing new job of tiling down at Coburg Olympic, and it just is going to be sensational when it's finished. So I think we're really lucky to have 6 pools, and I'm looking forward to being involved in a council that keeps investing in this infrastructure.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. Any other? Councillor Martin.
I too would like to rise to thank the officers who have worked so hard on this strategy, and to thank them for the consultation that they've run with the community and with us as well. I think it's been a really robust process. To the residents, I'd like to thank you for actually getting in touch with all of us so much. We don't know what we don't know, and so I really do thank the residents, especially the residents in the Pascoe Vale area, for being vocal and letting us know that that they really wanted to keep this pool running. I think it's been a really great interactive process, and hopefully with this strategy, and I really do hope that residents do communicate to us through this strategy what they want to see, and I'd just like to thank all the parties involved.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Any other councillor like to speak to this? Thanks, Councillor.
Look, only briefly, just to highlight to the residents of Fawkner that the recommendation is the outdoor pool becomes a family recreation area, specifically to attract young children. Fawkner has a high population of families with young children, so let us know your feedback on that. I am personally a councillor in strong support of something of that change. I think with young families, I do remember going to that pool as a primary school student with grandma who threw the fish and chips over the fence, so I didn't have to pay at the Fawkner Leisure Centre, which is quite good. But yes, I think that would be a great change. That would be a great change, but I do want to highlight that to the Fawkner residents to give them the opportunity to give feedback on that change as well.
Thank you, Councillor Farnley. Are there any other councillors to speak on this? There being no further discussion, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. DSD 5117, and I have Councillor National Disability Insurance Scheme. I have Councillor Farnley on his feet. Are you moving the officer recommendation?
I was recommending with a slight change to the...
Okay, can you tell us what that is, please? And then...
it was actually circulated through Councillor Abood. Regarding the dates change for consultation.
All right, okay, so the second of those, to the 1st of February.
I'll just turn to Councillor, are you happy with that change?
Okay.
Councillor Bush, you want to extend the time?
Okay, so knowing what, just before we go, so knowing what the motion is now, do we have a seconder? Yep, Councillor Riley. Okay, you can speak to it now, Councillor Riley.
This is a critical report that's coming to councillors, and now we are seeking community consultation. It is a change in step in the way we provide NDIS services to those that are receiving, sorry, not NDIS service, changes in the way we're providing disability care services. I want to highlight a couple of aspects of the report that are critical and really important. Firstly, that in regards to internal staff, there will be no redundancies. Those staff will be transitioned into other areas, specifically potentially within aged care or other disability service care areas. That's really important to a lot of councillors around this table. And the second one is that the current clients will be assisted to transition through the employment of a transition officer with one-on-one support. So there'll be lots of support for those people receiving disability service care from council at the moment. There are a lot of benefits with the NDIS system, specifically that the control goes to the client. They can allocate the funding in the manner in which they would like to receive it. The current system, whilst from council the services offered is very good, can be very rigid for some clients who may need specific elements of care. So the new system provides them with that level of flexibility. Having said that, we will employ and have an officer to transition all of those currently receiving care one-on-one onto the appropriate care package. And most importantly, all internal staff currently working within that team will transition to other disability areas within Moreland or potentially aged care. We'll work with those staff to do that. Now it's the opportunity for the community to have some feedback. I will note, with a few seconds left before Councillor Kavanagh rings his bell, that there was an extensive amount of viewers on Council's Facebook page when conducting some community consultation. A credit to the social development team who really engaged the community in some consultation. But before the final decision is taken from Council, we will go to the community for their work.
Thank you. Matted by 2 seconds. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor Kavanagh and Councillor Ifani for moving this. This is just, we have undertaken quite a lot of consultation and discussions with our community to date, and we are at a point where we're making a key decision as to where we go from here. It's important to know that our home care programs have been going for decades, and this will see it changing. It's not something that we've been able to control. It's something that the national government's, federal government has rolled out. We are one of the few councils at the end of that rollout to be undertaking this process, and we are in a way falling in with many of those in terms of following the proposal we're looking at is to not continue in this space in the future. We will continue in this space during the transition, and we want to make sure we transition every client into this new scheme and making sure that they are well cared for. We're talking about 222 people at the moment. However, that's a fraction of the 33,000 people who live in our city who have disabilities. So I just want to put it in that context. This is not the end of the consultation. We will be doing that over the summer period. It's not a great time to do it, but unfortunately we have to do this because of the timing that's been foisted upon us, and we need to get these decisions made early in the new year. We're at this point where we're going to, the advantage with us in going down the proposal that we're putting is that we'll be able to meet and deal with more needs of more of our citizens by taking those funds that we currently use and continuing to advocate and communicate with our residents around their needs, and then looking at how we will work and review our broader work in this space in the future and how we might actually roll out our disability action plan. And that's where the consultation is going to be really important, that people engage with us about that and how we do that. So in a way, we're doing two things. We're getting people to move into the NDIS system, which is, obviously a big change, and it's going to have a huge impact on every client, and important that they are informed and kept up to speed about what they need, what's being offered, and it's also requiring them to actually exercise their voice in terms of what their needs are, and it's giving them much more control over the types of programs, the types of support they get. So hopefully there'll be a whole lot more benefits that come from this new system for Moreland people in our home care system, but also there will be challenges with it. So, and I'm hoping we can manage that and support people through those. So I recommend that we support this motion and thank the officers for all their work. It's been a huge process, and it is complex and difficult, and I encourage everyone who's affected to actually get involved and find out answers to your questions if you have them. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Bolton.
I'd like to speak against and to foreshadow an alternative resolution. I suspect I might be one out on this. I feel the council needs to get more of a range of information from more of a range of services, in particular from some of the disability activist groups. Under NDIS, not all people who have a disability will be able to access NDIS. Currently, I don't think it is useful to refer just to the 223 current clients Moreland has, because council doesn't really advertise our service. So often people only find out about our service by accident. There are other people who need our service who don't even know that we offer a respite service. I've been in conversation with a councillor in Darebin who's got a child with a disability and is on their disability committee, and they passed an almost identically worded resolution to this last year or the year before last. She says that now, if she had the time over, she would vote differently on that resolution from her experience as a parent with a child with a disability. If she had a time over again, she would vote quite differently. Certainly her experience is that most people would prefer to keep the same carer if there's a rapport that's been built up. And you know, given that given that NDIS, you know, the cost of the service comes out of what the allocation. Her experience is, and her circle of friends who've got children with disability, is that people would prefer to stay with the same service if there's a real rapport and a compatibility, rather than hunting around for the cheapest possible service. I favour council. Actually, initially I was persuaded by some of the arguments that maybe council couldn't become an NDIS provider, but I believe that council can become an NDIS provider. It doesn't mean we have to provide the full suite of disability services. There's a lot of NDIS providers, I gather, who only cover a particular section, which in council's case would be what we currently provide. Maybe there might be some flexibility around hours and so forth, but I'd foreshadow an alternative resolution if this goes down.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Carley-Hannon.
Yeah. So I rise to speak in favour of the officer's recommendation, and through the chair would also like to respond to some of Councillor Bolton's arguments. So the main thing being that at the moment council subsidises the cost of our services by 40%, and under the NDIS, as it is a disability insurance scheme that is competitive, under the National Competition Policy, we as a council are actually unable to subsidise that. So that means that there would have to be a significant change in council's model in order to be an NDIS provider. Councillor Bolton also spoke about the fact that many of the residents in Moreland, and including a lot of the residents who use our services, may not be eligible for NDIS. So I think when we think about our role as council, we represent the whole municipality of Moreland, and we have to think about all of our residents. And so that means when we're being service providers, we have to consider what we can do to make sure that we actually represent our whole community, and that when we think about disability, we think what is the best thing that council can do to actually be active in this space and really make a change for people's lives. And considering this, councillors have done a lot to discuss what things we think we could be really important providers in, things like infrastructure, ensuring that we're a very livable city, and that we are advocates for people that have got varying needs and who might not be eligible for NDIS, and that means that we can also consider what things local government and state government could be doing, because this is a national scheme that will not meet the needs of every single one of our residents who are living with a disability. I also wanted to note that we have at the moment the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, who is going to be the industry expert, the one that provides the sort of linkages, and so council actually is engaging with all of the current NDIS providers and with the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, and considering all of our clients and our workers. So one thing that Councillor Bolton mentioned was that some clients like to stay with their workers. We're actually going to support workers to transition with their clients to other providers if we were to no longer be an NDIS provider, remembering that this is actually just going out for consultation. Another thing is that we're going to be supporting all of our clients up until the transition period concludes in May 2019. So this is going to be a really smooth transition. We're working with every single one of our clients. We have, probably many of you have seen, really quickly, in Coburg Centre, we've had constant consultations, and these are going to be ongoing. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carley-Hannon. Do you have any further speakers on this item? Being no further speakers, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against?
Can my vote be recorded,
Yeah.
thanks?
The only one against. Okay. Declare that carried. Okay. And you're clear on the voting? Yep, fine. Okay, DSD 5217, Moreland Arts Board, second expression of interest outcomes. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Riley. Do I have a seconder? For the officer recommendation, I assume, Councillor Riley? Yes. Yes. Seconded for the officer recommendation, Councillor Wood. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Riley?
Just briefly, this is a follow-up to an earlier recommendation, and we had some concerns around not filling all of the positions on the Moreland Arts Board. And as the council responsible, I just wanted to move this and say that we've extended the advertising expression of interest period, and people have submitted their applications, and we've now, mainly because we wanted to get more arts practitioners onto the board, and to try and get more diversity in terms of the cultural representation on the board as well. So I'm hoping that we've have done that through these nominations. So I recommend that council, as says, council appoint the members of the Moreland Arts Board, being Mitchell Brannan, Fern Smith and Luke Duncan King, and thank them and all of the people who have submitted their applications, and because not everyone was successful, but I do appreciate the effort and the risk you take of putting your name out there, and I would encourage those people who can stay involved and continue to attend the meetings. Their public meetings, come along and stay involved and make contributions. There are other ways to stay involved, even if you're not formally a board member.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Boone, did you want to speak to it?
I just wanted to acknowledge that I noticed that one of the new members of this group is actually from north of Bell Street, which is pretty thrilling. So welcome to the group, fan.
Excellent. Do we have any other speakers to this motion? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried.
Mr Mayor,
yes.
I've just noticed as a member in the gallery here for one of the particular reports later on, would we be able to bring one of those reports forward?
Which one is it you're after?
McBride Street, Faulkner.
Okay, I'll do it after we finish with social development. Okay, so it'll be 4 reports away. Okay, DSD 53/17, Celebrating Place Grants Review and Arts Activation Grant Guidelines. Moved by Councillor Riley. Do I have a seconder for the officer recommendation, I assume? Yes, and seconded by Councillor Yield-Diz. Thank you.
Thank you. Just briefly, this work has been in train throughout the year, and we it underwent a review. We actually had someone come in and review this program, our Celebrating Place Grants program, as it's been known since 2013. And now we're actually wanting to continue this program and calling it the Arts Activation Grant Program. So we've got a slight change in name just to indicate that we are moving into a slightly different phase. It's really to build on what we're doing and to continue to do what we do and make it better and easier for people to understand, to get advice, to get mentoring, to get training in how to submit and how to acquit their grants and so on. So we've learned a bit from this process, and we're hoping to make it slightly easier for artists and creators and people wanting to share their cultures throughout the city through this program. So I would recommend that we, Council, endorse the proposed Arts Activation Grant Program guidelines as attached in attachment 1 to this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Yield-Diz? No? Any other councillors like to speak to this item? Being no further discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. Next report is DSD 54/17, Moreland Social Cohesion Plan 2018 to 2020. Councillor Abood is on her feet. Are you moving the officer recommendation, Councillor Abood? Right, Councillor Abood's moving the officer recommendation. Do I have a seconder to that? Councillor Martin. Thank you, Councillor Abood.
Not too much to say about this, except that on page 140, directions outlined in the plan 2018 to 2010. So that won't work. We might want to make it 2020, but it might have been changed since then. So just a little mistake in the detail, but just that I'm really looking forward to the implementation of this particular work, specifically because it focuses, I think, in the north of the city, which is, my ward is in the north of the city, and just that I think there's opportunities to tie this, the social cohesion plan in with a couple of the other strategies that already exist, including the food system strategy, and also just potentially with some art-related stuff as well. So I know that there's already been a whole lot of work, and Councillor Bolton will probably talk to this more, but because she knows more about it, but a lot of work already that's gone under the bridge in terms of social cohesion, especially around the Faulkner Neighbourhood House. And I understand that this impacts Glenroy as well, and Hadfield and other areas in the north of the city. But I'm just quite excited about the fact that this has got some money behind it, and we're going to be able to do some work in this space, because I think that as long as we have that sign on the front that says, you know, one community proudly diverse, then we need to really tap into making sure that those people from those diverse communities are supported.
Thank you, Councillor Byrd. Councillor Martin?
Yeah, just briefly, I'd like to draw everyone, for those reading at home, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to page 452, which I think really has a fantastic oversight for our entire city. And one of the things that I have noticed in particular looking at that is that if you compare Brunswick and Glenroy, they actually have a very similar level SEIFA index score, but the actual community survey which has happened, the perceived levels of disadvantage is hugely different. And I think that's a really, really interesting statistic, and I really encourage everyone to go and have a look at that table, because I found it really informative and really interesting. And I really do commend this work. I think it's a fantastic plan, and I do echo Councillor Byrd's comments that really this is about integrating our entire city, and I'm really looking forward to the work that comes out of it.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Any other councillor? Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, I did want to make just a couple of points. In the beginning of the report, it talks about some of the priority communities which, you know, at risk of social exclusion. I'm just not on the right page now. And it talks about international students, Muslim women, newly arrived migrants and asylum seekers. There is, and there might even be another group as well, it talks about, obviously it's not an exhaustive list, there are other groups which also face exclusion. And one group I did want to raise, which Moreland has got a reasonable population of, are people who've migrated to Australia from New Zealand, in particular a lot of Pacific Islanders and Maori, who've come to Australia under the particular visa conditions that relate between Australia and New Zealand. It's not the same sort of migration system that, you know, people who later become permanent residents experience. And so a lot of these people who've lived here for many, many years and have families, grandkids, etc. here, are not eligible to become permanent residents under the points system, and therefore it means they're not eligible for any kind of welfare despite paying taxes. And so if they lose a job and it takes some time to get a job, which is the experience of a lot of people nowadays, they're not eligible for any kind of welfare benefits whatsoever. And so there are definitely some, and it's not very well known in Australia that there is this large number of people who are really excluded. And so, I mean, there's obviously other groups. It's not an exhaustive list. I certainly support the work that's proposed to be done with these particular groups. But certainly I think there is quite a bit of disadvantage in that Maori Pacific Islander grouping, which lives in Moreland. I certainly endorse this plan, and I'd like to see it in action, and especially some of the practical proposals.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Are there any other speakers? Being no further speakers, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. DSD 5517, alcohol, drug use and antisocial behaviour in Sydney Road, Brunswick. Councillor Martin to move and Councillor Yildiz to second.
Riley, thanks.
Oh, sorry. I did I say Martin? I'm sorry. Apologise. Councillor Riley.
Thank you. I'm presenting a lot of these reports tonight with my my hat on as portfolio for arts and culture. So I just want to This one's not quite along those lines, but I'll be doing another one in a moment. But this one arose out of an issue where we, as Urban Planning Committee, considered an application around the Albert Street and Sydney Road precinct and Frith Street, and there was an application for a food truck business to be started up, and it was one of those, like many of our planning applications, it was complex. However, during that application process, it was quite evident from the local residents in that area between Albert Street and Victoria Street, but even slightly further afield, that the behaviours and firstly, the numbers of patrons that are coming out of our clubs and pubs, and some of them are in gambling venues as well, pouring out after 11, 12, 1 and 3 onto the streets. We're into the thousands, and this report tonight actually, it was a way of trying to address some of the pressures on the residents there, because they're in a mixed-use zone and they're having to deal with some of the behaviours of those people as they come out and the effects of intoxication and other drugs. So this report really just highlights what the concerns that we had there, and it actually has a second part which I should have flagged, which was that we wanted to include second point, which requests officers to investigate and implement a simple access point, potentially on Council's website, whereby residents can make contact with government and other agencies that are directly responsible for dealing with aspects of antisocial behaviour in the municipality.
Okay, just before, Councillor Yildiz, are you still happy to second that with that additional point?
Thank you. Fine. Yes, Councillor Yildiz. And I just in closing, I would like to sort of reference that what has happened with the locals is that they're making noise complaints, they're making complaints to police about, safety issues or threats and so on. People are, excuse the language, but they're basically vomiting and they're pissing in our streets and outside their front doors, and it's pretty bad, and not to mention the broken glass and all the other stuff that happens around there. So there are many related issues, and what we're trying to do with point 2 is to actually give our residents a clear guide. Where do you go when you want to complain about noise because the venue's staying open longer than it is, or is playing music much louder than it's permitted to play? Where do you go to? Do you go to the Brunswick Police Station, or do you ring 000? And it's just to give people a really quick guide as to where you go to make noise complaints, because you can also go to the EPA besides council. You might go to, as I said, you might go to the 000 or to the local Brunswick station to ring the police, and where to go in the best instance, depending on the nature and the severity of what's going on right outside your house. And also around liquor licensing and other things. So it's trying to bring that together and actually give residents a very clear, pithy guide as to where to go, because there are a number of state agencies as well as council that will deal with these. So I'm hoping this report, and I want to thank officers for their work in this area and hope that it gets the full support. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Yildiz?
I echo what Councillor Riley said. Yes, there's a lot of urinating that happens at that time of night as well.
Urinating is better.
With 2,700 patrons in and around that area, I commend the officers on the report, and it's yet another measure to keep our residents safe in and around Brunswick, where we all know what happened there almost 6 years ago. So, well done, officers. Good report.
Thank you, Councillor Yildiz. Are there any other speakers to this report? Being no further speakers, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declared that carried. DSD 56/17 Arts Investment Grants Program Guidelines. Councillor Riley's on his feet. Are you moving the officer recommendation?
As it's read, thank you.
Councillor Riley. Do we have a seconder for the officer recommendation? And Councillor Carly Hannon.
Thank you, Councillor Carly Hannon. Just quickly, this will be the last time I'll speak for a little while, hopefully, in terms of at least moving the motions. Just to let people know that with the Arts and Culture program this year, we've actually reviewed our policy, and we now have a 2017-2022 Arts and Culture strategy called Creative Capital. So with that work, this report arises out of that, and like the earlier report that I moved around our place grants, or what's now called our activating place grants. So I want to commend the officers and all of council who've been involved in this, because arts and culture goes across many of the different parts of council. It's not just in that unit. This initiative tonight is trying to boost our arts investment grant program And it came out of the review and in part of that policy development where we noticed that the support that we give for independent artists and professionals is something that we wanted to do and wanted to give more of a priority to. We also noticed that in some of the surrounding councils, they were doing this slightly better than we were, and we didn't want to be left behind, particularly because we love our residents and those creative people that live and work here, and many of them are based and work here, but many of them obviously work outside this space. And we do run some pretty terrific programs, I think, in the city, but I think this will be a way to enhance it. It comes out of our council plan, so it fits there very neatly. It's a moderate investment, $50,000 over two years, to try and bring organisations into our city, or to encourage those that are here to actually to do better in investing in and providing and delivering high quality programming in our municipality. So I really want to commend the officers and thank people for their work in this space, and I'm looking forward, presuming this gets up, that the Arts Board will be able to progress this and do some further work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Carley-Hannon? No? Any other councillors like to speak to this item? Being no further speakers, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Now, councillors, I did agree to move up one of the items further down the list. So we're going to look at a DCS 7217 McBride Street, Faulkner, Vic Roads land. So that's the report that we're going to look at, and Councillor Farnley is on his feet. Are you moving the officer recommendation, Councillor?
No, Mr Mayor.
Would you like to read your...
I'm moving a slight alternative, and that is to point 4, and I'll just await that to come on the screen. Make it easy for councillors. I'm happy to try and find it.
That's the one.
It's the alternative to point 4. Yeah, that's it. Yep. And if so, that is just to clarify. We are writing to the CEO of Vic Roads to seek that they give the entire parcel land to council, and upon receiving negative feedback from Vic Roads, the council officers will report back to council for further direction from council.
Right, okay, so that's moved by Councillor Farley. You're happy to say Councillor Bolton. Now you may speak to it, Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have spoken at length about this particular parcel of land behind McBride Street in Faulkner, and I think there's general agreement around the table that we would love for this piece of land to be retained as public open space and parkland for our community. And in fact, what we're doing here is writing to the owner of those lands, so the Vic Roads, and writing to the Minister for Roads to see that they pass that land over to council. I do note in the recent press release, hot off the press from the Faulkner Residents Association, that Mr Maguire has, the member for Broadmeadows, has attended this site. We're grateful for his attendance. He may have had his wires crossed. It seems that he has noted that Moreland Council has jurisdiction over the site and has made the decisions concerning its future. Look, the reason we're writing to Vic Roads is because it's Vic Roads that has jurisdiction over the site, not Moreland Council. So, but we are grateful for Mr Maguire's engagement and would love his further support in transferring and gifting this land to Moreland Council. That is our priority. We want to make it clear to residents. We want this to remain parkland. I thank Mr Perry from the Faulkner Residents Association for his work and activism in this space. Certainly I joined Councillor Bolton and the member for Wills, Mr Khalil, on a walk there a few weeks ago. It was actually quite informative because I didn't realise how loud the industrial fans are backing on from that industrial precinct at McBride Street. Actually quite loud, so I'm not sure how you would put residential development right behind it. It probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. So that's our direction. We're seeking that the Vic Roads CEO and the Minister for Roads work with Council to gift this parcel of land and retain it as public open space.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bolton.
Yes, I certainly support this motion, especially with the alternative point 4. I felt it was inadequate, the original officer recommendation to retreat to the issue of just getting a strip of the land. I think really, you know, this is really what should have come to council in the very beginning is, you know, back in 2015 about the possibility of council actually acquiring the land either by gifting or some other means. I certainly think we shouldn't leave it. If we can't get it gifted, we do need to try look at all other options, including buying the land. But I think, you know, we do need to campaign as hard as we can for gifting it. I think it's outrageous that they're trying to just flog off public open space. I mean, Vic Brads probably owes council lots of money for council maintaining the open space over all of these years of all the mowing and so forth. But I sort of feel as if this area of open space is a bit of a different category to the open space we were talking about earlier under park close to home, because this is the land along the creek roads. So it's not just open space for the pleasure of residents, although that's important as well, but it's also preservation of these natural corridors. And it was interesting at the walkthrough of this creek, of this piece of land beside the creek in Fawkner. There are quite a few Brunswick residents and Coburg residents there, as well as Fawkner residents, because this strip of land is important to everybody who loves Merri Creek. And probably I imagine it is similar with the Hopetoun Avenue piece of open space. It's important to everyone who loves Moonee Ponds Creek. So I think that it's sort of a different kind of category, and I think we have to look at it from a slightly different point of view to the park close to home. It's these waterways are really vital to all of Melbourne and need to be protected. So we definitely support acquiring, preferably by gifting, this land.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Abood, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would. I'd like to read this. Jurisdiction. The practical authority granted to a legal body to administer justice within a defined field of responsibility. Colloquially, it is used to refer to the geographical area which such authority applies. The legal term refers only to the granted authority and not to a geographical area. So I'm just hoping that's a prophecy and I'm just going to move on. I agree with Councillor Bolton. It concerns everybody who loves the Merri Creek, and with that in mind, I've spoken to Louisa McMillan from the Merri Creek Management Committee, which is a committee that I still sit on as a council representative. And I've also spoken to Anne McGregor from the Friends of Merri Creek, and they've both informed me that they are quite happy with the proposal to make these minor changes to the recommendations on this, and have pledged their commitment to the campaign to preserve the creek and the habitat surrounding it. And I commend them for the work that they've done so far, and I commend you, Mr Perry, for the work that you've done so far, managing to secure a meeting with Mr Maguire. And I hope that we will be able to keep moving and end up with a positive outcome, so that, like the councillors have said before me, the land that the city's been looking after all this time and the residents have been enjoying will be secured either as a committee of management or whatever happens for the city. So thanks everybody.
Thanks, Councillor Abood. Are there any other councillors who would like to speak to this item? Being no further speakers, we'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Now, councillors, we'll move back up to the beginning of corporate services to DCS 6917, Governance Report, December 2017. Do I have a mover? Yes, moved by Councillor Riley and seconded by Councillor Abood. You're moving and seconding the officer report, I assume?
Yes, I am.
Yes, and happy with that. Would you like to speak to Councillor Riley?
Just briefly, this is if you like, it's an omnibus report in a sense that covers committees to council, assemblies of councillors, our meeting schedule for 2018, and an update on our gambling strategy, and and also authorisation for the Planning and Environment Act. So it's covering those key areas. And I would encourage people to read those reports and keep in touch with many of the committees that we run, and this consultation engagement with the community is very important. And I'm just trying, maybe someone else can speak to it, but around the gambling strategy, which is that we have invested in this area for some time. We've also taken a case around some poker machines going into the Glenroy RSL, which is actually something that's gone. We are appealing from VCAT. So we are investing in this area. We're wanting to see that the implications of and the detrimental effects of gambling are addressed. And there's been some good publicity lately around the enormous investment Australians are making into this area and the detrimental effects of it. The other good side of it is that we've actually just opened a libraries after dark program in the north, which is really, I would really encourage people to go and check out, and particularly if you know anyone needing some support. This is a way of getting people who are trying to deal with their gambling problems and addictions to go and hang out in the library with some other great Moreland people and librarians. Who can find this any better than librarians in your community? And this is a great trial we're running, so I just want to slip this in here as I was making this report, because it's a really fine example of the kind of work that Council's doing, along with some of the other people in this area, other councils and other agencies, community groups that are advocating around gambling. So please have a look at this report, but even more so promote the fact that you can go to the Glenroy Library after dark on a Thursday and hang out with some good people rather than lose your money down those funny machines. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Reilly. Councillor Boo, did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, just very quickly, the same thing struck me. So just encouraging anybody who needs to go to the Moreland City Council webpage, and just if you put gambling in the little search engine at the top there, it'll just take you to what we're doing in that space. There's a whole lot of different actions that people are encouraged to do. So put a sticker on your wheelie bin, put a sign up at your workplace. All types of addiction carry a huge amount of stigma, and gambling is an addiction. And I think that the more support people have handling this particular addiction, the better off the community will be. We've seen very strong links between gambling and violence against women, and so I think that this work that we're doing in this space is really, really important. But I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that the Human Rights Committee Human Rights Advisory Committee meeting minutes are inside this report. It's one of the committees that I go to, that I attend, and we hear from lots of other working groups report to the Human Rights Advisory Committee, and we're getting some pretty valuable information there about lots of things that are happening with sort of marginalised areas of the community as well. So just good to see this stuff still in train and happening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Boo. And yes, Councillor Bolton.
Just like to mention a very brief thing, and it's probably something not within the council's capability, but given that we've got a gambling strategy, my feeling is that gambling advertising has gone well beyond anything I've seen in my lifetime, and I imagine it's to do with the privatisation of the TAB and all of these gambling, megapolies or, massive gambling corporations from overseas coming into the Australian market. And it's not through poker machines now. Well, I mean, there's poker machines is still an issue, but you can just be in your smoko break at work and gamble on your phone. And I think, I'm not moving a motion or amendment or anything now, but I think when we next look at the gambling strategy, I think we need to include this as part of our advocacy, because I think the younger generation, it won't be the poker machines, it'll be this whole thing where you just gamble from your smoko break, gamble at 11 o'clock at night when you can't get to sleep from your phone, through all of these different massive gambling corporations that are advertising full on TV and everywhere. So anyway, that's just a little point because it was mentioned in the report.
No, thank you very much. Any other speakers on this? Being no further discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. Our next report is DCS 70/17, Debtor Management, Financial Hardship and Vacant Land and Unoccupied Building Policies. Do I have a mover? Yep, Councillor Tapanos. For the officer recommendation, Councillor Tapanos? Yes, and a seconder? Yep, Councillor Yildiz, thank you. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Tapanos?
Just briefly, mainly this report just changes some of the delegations and strikes the rebate for the differential rate for the vacant and unoccupied land, and also adopts the financial hardship policy. So I'm happy with the officer's recommendation, the work that's been done, and think that these deserve adoption tonight. But I do want to do stress that there is significant amount of hardship that does occur in a municipality, particularly around the payment of rates and our pensioner communities in particular. And I do think that sometime in the future that is an unresolved issue that does need to also be addressed. And I know that in the financial hardship policy, the interests of rates could be waived if financial hardship is proven. But I think we do need to, in the future, have a look at going above and beyond that as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tapanos. Did you want to speak to a Councillor Yildiz? Any other speakers? Being no further speakers, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. And we're looking at DCS 71/17, Financial Management Report for the period ending the 31st of October 2017. Do I have a mover for the officer recommendation? Thanks, Councillor Yildiz. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Abood. Would you like to speak to a Councillor Yildiz? Councillor Abood? No. Any other councillors like to speak to it? Being no speakers, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. We move on to City Infrastructure Councillors. I have Councillor Farnley on his feet. It's DCI 66/17, Adoption of the General Local Law 2018. Are you moving the officer report or something?
With a slight amendment.
Okay, can you explain that to us without going into too much detail until we get a seconder?
The slight amendment incorporates some of Councillor Martin's recommendations to strengthen some environmental protections, and I'll let him go into the details.
Right, okay.
So that will be the motion that I'd like to move.
Right, so
Councillor's recommendation with some slight...
are you going to second, Councillor Martin?
Yeah.
Perhaps, would you mind just detailing a little bit of what those changes are?
I can stand to that. Thank you, Councillor Farnley, for moving those. So essentially, what this does is it looks at two clauses in particular, 1.10.15, and that is around our stormwater drains and pollution going into our stormwater drains. So what this does is it essentially moves it away from talking about minimising to actually preventing, and what it also does is it moves some words around so that you're essentially minimising any of the biological or organic things that may dirt, all those sort of things, but then you're moving to prevent any chemicals, pollutants, any of those sort of things. Might be things like styrofoam or plastics that get blown out of a bin that go into the stormwater drain. That in particular references that, and also as part of that, it'll be actually increasing the penalty points, so increasing the fine for people that don't actually follow that, because it's one of those things that a lot of people don't take it seriously, and we should be taking it very, very seriously. And also point C, there just adds to the definition of what a mature tree is. So the officer, or the report actually only talked about single trunk trees, and I think also we should encapsulate multiple trunk trees into that, so that there's not any loopholes around that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor. Would you like to speak more to it now, Councillor Farnley?
Certainly would. The general local laws provides a general framework for the local laws within our municipality. It's a critical document to provide protections for a lot of residents. I suppose what I'll do is I'll just quickly highlight some of the ones that had a bit more feedback in from the community in terms of how we're going to be adopting if councils vote that way shortly. One of those includes I want to commend the council officers for going above and beyond in regards to camping in a public place. There won't be any allowance for recreational camping, but we will be putting in a protection that says we cannot issue an offence to any person that is homeless, a protection that we've gone above and beyond in. I do want to commend actually John Englade in the audience who raised this, but previously we had a law that you couldn't tie an animal or a pet to a pole, which, as we know, happens a lot when people go in and out of shops. We've just adjusted that to say that you can't do that if it's more than 15 minutes for the welfare of the animal. In addition to that, furniture in a public place, a law that we've adjusted to ensure that people that run a commercial activity with an ABN and the like do need to put get a permit from council if they wish to put, a table and some chairs out on Sydney Road and obstruct the footpath. However, anyone doing any type of community work is exempt from having to get a permit. Another one was hard waste. We encourage recycling in this municipality. I understand there was previously a local law regarding not being allowed to take a look at other people's or realise other people's hard waste. That has gone, but we have retained you cannot interfere with people's household rubbish, which is reflective of what the community are after. So I think this general local laws really encapsulates exactly the direction the community was seeking us to go in, following the extensive feedback, and I am happy to answer any questions from councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Farley. Do we have any other speakers to this item? Councillor Bolt.
I've got some amendments, not very many, which, well, actually really just two, actually.
Okay.
Amendments, which maybe they might be voted on separately. So the first one is, but except I had them in the reverse order, but it actually appears first in the document, is after 5.1 and 5.2 on keeping of animals, add a note, which I notice it does in other parts of the general local law, that 5.1 and 5.2 don't apply to a person who has a permit under the Wildlife Act to keep a native animal.
Okay, all right.
Because at the moment it refers to, it says you can only keep these categories of animals, but some people have a permit under the Wildlife Act to keep a native animal, as opposed to the Domestic Animal Act, which mostly our local law deals with.
Okay,
so,
so
really
that's your first. That's your first.
Yeah, that was my first.
Can I ask the mover and the seconder if that's acceptable to them?
I'd like to just seek advice from the
okay, fine. Happy to do
that. Through the Mayor, in principle, there's nothing, no issue in that amendment, and although Councillor Yielder has just raised with me whether the actual, given the Wildlife Act is a state piece of legislation, whether that would override the local law anyway, so it may not be required.
Okay. I think if I'm interpreting the advice that the Director is comfortable with it, I think. Am I correct in that?
Through the Mayor, comfortable with the intent that someone who had a wildlife permit would be exempt from the number of animals component, but I suppose the point I'm making is the local law, the Local Government Act does not allow the local law to override state legislation. The Wildlife Act is a state legislation, so it's probably better if it's left out of the general local law.
Better if it's left out. Okay. Actually, I'll let you go and then you can ask your questions. And then
Just a further question in regard to this. I was contacted by someone who apparently, I think, had a different viewpoint at one stage. I'm not sure how long ago this happened, with a council officer over whether or not you could keep a native animal. So that's why I sort of felt that it was important to have some clarity, because otherwise the wording of the current local law indicates you're only allowed to keep cats, dogs. I mean, it's got particular numbers, but it says you can only keep these particular species, cats, dogs, ferrets, etc., etc. It goes through a list, but it doesn't indicate that there might be some people who might have other sorts of animals which are permitted. So it's really more of a note, or it could be included as a note in the general local law at the bottom.
Would you be more comfortable with a note?
Through the Mayor, a note would be okay. It's just the Local Government Act doesn't allow the local law to conflict with any...
Are you satisfied to amend that to be a note on the local law?
Yeah, I'd be satisfied with that.
Okay, so if you're satisfied with that, is the mover and seconder satisfied with that?
If it's a note, it's noting it rather than
Yes.
Can I suggest that I note in line with this before, the director can actually maybe amend some of the wording, keeping the intention the same, just to make sure that we do get the wording and that we're not contradicting the wildlife balance.
Okay, I think that's amenable. I think.
Is that
okay?
Yeah, that's
okay.
fine.
All right, so that's going to be incorporated into the substantive motion as far as the note goes. All
Then
right.
I've got one
Sorry,
sorry.
did you want to speak still or not?
No.
No, Councillor Bolt.
So I've just got a second amendment, and this is in part 6. So it's referring to, so basically what the amendment is, after 6.4, insert the words 6.2, 6.3 and 6.4 apply only to those persons who have an ABN unless on one of the following registers, which is, so I'm suggesting we insert the same wording we've got in regard to street furniture, and those 3 parts for people who haven't got them handy. 6.2 refers to authorisation required for street art. 6.3 refers to authorisation required for portable advertising signs, and 6.4 refers to authorisation required for goods in a public place.
Okay, I think we've got the pretty clear on that. I'll ask first of all if it's acceptable to the mover and the seconder.
Can I just have a moment to understand?
Yeah.
What's
Okay,
that
yeah.
for?
Look at Councillor Bolton, I'll let you speak to it briefly just to inform the council of what your intention
But
is
I
with it.
probably need a seconder, don't I?
Probably, yeah.
It's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable. So does Councillor Bolton have a seconder for a motion?
I need a moment to understand it too.
At the moment, I'm afraid it lapses, Councillor Bolton. I'm sorry about that. So,
Just one last amendment.
yes.
Which is to delete 2.7, which reads, a person must not leave any item associated with camping in a public place.
No, it's not
And
acceptable.
this is referring to
I
homeless
understand.
people.
All right, I think I'm clear on it. It's not acceptable to the mover. So does Councillor Bolton have a seconder for that? I'm sorry, that also lapses, Councillor Bolton. So we go back now to the substantive motion, unless there's any other discussion. Councillor Bolton's note has been included in the substantive motion regarding the wildlife. Are there any other speakers to the substantive motion? Being no further speakers, I'm going to put
I'd like to close the
debate. You are allowed to close the debate. Any other speakers before Councillor Farley? Yes, Councillor Riley will speak and then.
I guess I would just like to quickly note that under 2.8 of the camping in public places, a person cannot be issued an infringement for an offence where the person is homeless. And I think, and it continues on, we've had a lot of discussion about this and many of the community have been involved in it. And I do think it picks up on some of the Councillor Bolton's concerns around people leaving some of their things there. We do not intend to move people on and displace them if they are indeed homeless and unable to live in what we would consider a reasonable housing situation. So I do think we've tried to have covered it there. I know that won't satisfy everybody, but I think this is about balancing different requirements and needs in the community, and I think that's what that is intending to do. We've had that there before and we're trying to continue to
Thank you,
work in that
Councillor
way
Riley.
as a council.
No, thank you very much for that contribution.
Can I just speak in general on the because I only
Yes,
spoke to the
yes, you haven't spoken on the
before
substantive
closure
motion.
of
That's
debate.
correct. I'll let you do it.
It's
Yes.
really just a brief point on that, which is that I certainly understand that council officers have, implemented the council laws in a very friendly kind of way in the past with regard to homeless people, and that's the intention. And the new wording in this current proposal compared to the previous proposal is, puts the onus of proof on the council rather than the homeless person. So that's, I think, a very good, a much better situation. But this thing about a person must not leave any item associated with camping in a public place, I know I've heard from the CEO that this is just empowers the council to remove things and isn't intended in any discriminatory way. But certainly in the CBD at the moment, this is causing massive, massive distress for many, many homeless people where, you know, now obviously they've got different council officers, they've got a different regime in the CBD, but this is causing massive distress because, you know, in that case, council officers swooping in, confiscating everything. It's just the same as when your house is burgled and you come in and find things destroyed and gone and so forth. So, I mean, it's more, that's the perspective I'm coming at it with that. Anyway, it's lapsed, but I just want to explain a little bit more the context.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton, and I am going to call on Councillor Farnley to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to comment on the manner in which this community consultation has occurred. Mr. Mayor, I'm sure you'd agree that the role of a councillor is quite varied, but there are two key fundamentals. Number one, representing the community, and number two, being a good ambassador for council, for Moreland. That includes its employees, its suburbs and its people. I think it was a stain on the previous council that there wasn't enough action on Michael Teddy and the fact that he was absent, he wasn't engaged, and was a poor representative of the community. I thought it was terrible that the council didn't act on that. And in the same light, I'm not going to sit by and allow bad behaviour from this council to go unnoticed. I was extremely disappointed in the way Sue Bolton carried the debate in regards to the general local laws. I felt that she misrepresented council officers' views.
Can we keep to the substantive motion, Councillor?
I'm referring to the general local laws,
yes, all right.
Chair. I felt she misrepresented the council officers' views and misrepresented its intentions, and we do need to call it out. It was unnecessary scare campaign.
I actually think you should consider the
I'm
code of
talking about
conduct
the
of
general
this.
Right.
This is an opinion,
I'm going to stop you. Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to stop you there, Councillor Farnley. All right. I can understand what you're saying, but unless you're going to speak to the actual motion that's before us, I think going back on behaviour in the past or whatever, I just don't think it's fair to close the debate. So
it is ironic that we talked about free speech.
No, I know.
during
I know,
the debate,
but
and we can't.
But this is infringing on the code of conduct.
It is talking about the general local laws and behaviour in which we had that consultation.
Okay. Councillor Farnley, are you going to talk about the local laws, or are we going to?
Yeah, in particular, I want to highlight the
talk about the. Okay.
For example,
right.
the council officers put forward protection.
Just before you go on, I don't want you to mention a councillor's name during this part of it. Okay, thank you.
To be clear, the council officers put forward a recommendation to protect homeless people in the city of Moreland who may be camping. Protection. Yet one particular councillor went out to the community and said Moreland is trying to attack the rights of homeless people. That is a complete misrepresentation and a complete lie on what the council officers were actually doing. The second example is in regards to people's rights on free speech. One particular councillor said the Moreland Council is trying to attack people's rights to free speech by proposing new general local laws. That's a complete falsehood. There was no new recommendations put forward in this general local law that proposed people's attack on free speech. All it was we made an adjustment. If that council actually went to the community and said, hey, do you think we should review and strengthen the local laws regarding public furniture and stuff, that would be completely fine.
And
but
time, Councillor, thank you. Time now. Thank you very much, Councillor. All right, we're going to close the debate there and I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? And declare that carried. DCI 6717, Domestic Animal Management Plan, 2017 to 2021. You move the officer recommendation?
Yes, please.
Councillor Davison is moving the officer recommendation? Yes. And a seconder, Councillor Martin. Would you like to speak to Councillor Davison?
Yes, just very briefly, to point out this is something that Council has to do under state legislation, and the biggest change within this comes to cat desexing. So we all love our pets, and now it's going to become compulsory to desex your cat for various health reasons, and there's an incentive there for residents to desex their cat, that the registration will be free and then at a subsidised rate in future years, as well as microchipping. I think this is a really good incentive, and the domestic animal management plan really shows council's proactive involvement with our pets.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davidson. Councillor Martin, would you like to say?
Yeah, just briefly. Again, I'd like to thank officers for putting this work together. It really does reinforce our commitment, and I know I've been contacted by a lot of residents in the north of the city who have issues with stray cats in particular. And what this is doing is it's reinforcing our commitment to actually take steps to reduce those stray cat numbers by enforcing these desexing and also providing residents who haven't got their cat desexed the incentives to actually come by discounting the registration fee. So I really do thank the officers for putting this together and really do encourage all the residents of Moreland who do own a cat to actually take us up on the offer and go and get it desexed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Any further discussion? Being no further discussion, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Councillors, as indicated at the start of the meeting, I believe I have a conflicting personal interest in the item as Moira Kelly is a very close cousin of mine. I seek Council's consent to be exempted from voting on this item and I'll leave the meeting for the debate. So because Moira is not my sister, etc., that she is my cousin, but I feel I can't vote on it. So I'm asking to be exempted. So all those in favour of Council consenting to me being exempted from voting on this matter, please raise their hands. So, against? I declare that carried. And I now need a mover to appoint the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Abood, as Temporary Chair in my absence. Councillor Davidson and Councillor Riley. And can I put that to the vote? All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Thank you, councillors.
Okay, so I'm just moving on to DCI 6817, establishment of the Moira Kelly Creating Hope Foundation parking permit zone. Councillor Farnley.
I'd like to move an alternative recommendation. It's been circulated and I'll wait for that to appear on the screen. In summary, this alternative recommendation puts forward and reflects the actual council officers' intentions here, which is not to allocate exclusively to any organisation or group any particular parking base. However, recognising that this organisation does deserve some extra support, we are looking to introduce 2 additional disabled parking bays with a 3-hour time limit to ensure there's good circulation. But again, not exclusive for the use of any organisation, as no foundation that I'm aware of has exclusive access to parking bays, and that's not reflective of how we conduct parking within a municipality.
Thank you. And for the gallery, Councillor Yildiz has seconded this. Would you like to say anything? Are there any other speakers to this motion? Councillor Davidson?
Just to say, I was previously in favour of the officer's recommendation, and this is a hard call for me to make because the Moira Kelly Foundation is an organisation that really does assist the most vulnerable people in the community, and I've spoken to Moira Kelly personally, and she's explained the immense difficulties she has with transporting children and people who may be severely disabled from one end of the street to where the foundation is because of all the parked cars. I don't know if this is going to resolve those issues for her, and I feel that the argument that this will set a precedent is not founded when we're separating this and we're bringing it to council to make an individual decision on an organisation that is almost like a home or a hospital for these people. And just like a business operates, where businesses have parking allocated specifically for their business, Moira Kelly does this because she's giving back to the community. And I feel that I want to be able to show her that we are giving back to her by saying, yes, we understand the difficulties that you're having with the parking here. To then stretch that to additional disabled parking bays detracts from other people in the street who may not be disabled using not being able to use those bays. And to me, having the individual bays specifically allocated for that particular location makes more sense.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Councillor Riley?
Yeah, I do need to rise and speak to this just briefly, that I do agree with the intention of the amended motion. It is vexed, it's difficult. This foundation does a lot of great work, you can't question that, but there are many foundations and many organisations that do great work in this city, and I don't think we're going to be in a position to be able to roll out parking for those, particularly in the south of the city where there's a lot of pressures on our parking. And if this doesn't work, let's come back and revisit it. It doesn't, nothing's locked in forever, so it doesn't mean we can't come back to have another look at it. And secondly, comes to a point, and I've been on boards where we have to get to the point where you may have to make some critical decisions about your organisation and where you live. And if this is not the right place for where that foundation is to live, or any other foundation in the city because of its parking, then you may have to consider it and move, because we probably aren't going to allocate you one with your name on it. And I think it's really important that we keep those parks available. There is a competition around that area, we understand. The reports come back that there are other people with disabilities needing to use those parks. So I think this is a good compromise and a successful way forward to try and address the foundation's concern and the intention behind this to try and alleviate their problems, and at the same time making those spaces available for the rest of our residents and businesses, people doing business in our city. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Is there anyone else? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bolton.
Coming into the meeting, I would have supported this resolution and after reading the report. But after hearing Councillor Davidson's explanation of this organisation, I think I've changed my mind, and I would, be opposed to this and prefer to support the original officer's recommendation. I think it's not... I think, to just say that an organisation that caters for people with disabilities, that's its main focus, should just shift out, I just don't think is acceptable. I feel that I know there are a number of individuals scattered through houses who, have disabilities and need access to parking zones, but I think, I'm convinced by the arguments of Councillor Davidson that there needs to be some special exception in this particular case for an organisation that copes with not just mildly disabled people, but people with a serious disability.
Can I just have a point of order, please?
Yes.
It was characterised, I believe, under Councillor Bolton's remarks that I suggested they just shift out. That was not my intention.
Sorry,
It wasn't my intention.
Mistaken wording.
Because it's important. I really value their work, and I just wanted to be clear that it wasn't something I was intending. I was saying at a certain point, once we work through some of the possibilities and we do some more negotiation, that may be what the board of the foundation needs to think about, because it may not that we can resolve it, because parking seems to be one of those things that keeps coming back to us. So I'm not wanting to dismiss the importance of it, that's all. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Is there anyone else that would like to talk to this particular item?
I'll close it.
Councillor Afandi?
Thank you.
Be nice, please.
Madam. I just wanted to respond to the assertion that this isn't setting precedent because it's coming up to council as unique once off. Unfortunately, what would happen if we were to pass making exclusive parking arrangements for one foundation is other foundations will approach councillors to seek exclusive access to parking as well. That's where the challenge is. So in a way, it is setting precedent from that regard. That's what I'm just trying to avoid. It's certainly not any comment to the great work that this foundation does. I'm sure they are fantastic. I haven't had the privilege of meeting this organisation. However, in fairness to the hundreds of organisations and foundations that are operating in Moreland, making exclusive arrangements with one particular foundation does set a precedent that will mean other foundations will approach council for exclusive parking arrangements too, which is why I prefer to keep them as disabled public parking spots to better support this organisation.
Thank you, Councillor Afandi. Since the mover has closed the debate, I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour?
Against? I declare that carried.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Okay, we're on to DCI 6917, unconstructed laneways. I have a mover from Councillor Carly Hannon. You're moving the officer recommendation?
Yes, I am.
Right. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Martin. Thank you, Councillor Carly Hannon.
Thank you. I would just like to move the officer recommendation, but also speak a little bit to the comments and questions from the gallery earlier. Basically to say that...
Need a second first.
Oh, yeah, sure, seconder.
You just have a seconder, Councillor Martin,
cool,
seconder.
Yeah, basically to say that when getting elected onto council, unconstructed laneways was an area that I was quite passionate about. Coming from the area of Coburg, there are a lot of laneways that are unmade where there hasn't been a clear direction in terms of what their future looks like, whether it's in terms of open space or as infrastructure that is a roadway for cars, cyclists, pedestrians. So I support this piece of work, recognising that it's the first step in then coming back with something around what council's contribution is versus the residents in the community, because I recognise that not all of our laneways are equal and they don't all serve the same purpose. So some of our laneways, particularly in the south of the municipality, I do believe would make sense to be permeable, to potentially be pop-up parks or parklets and other forms of open space, and for us to be innovative with them. In Glenroy, Coburg and other parts, I believe that some of our laneways are actually just really important roadways, or have the potential to be, from the train and tram to be able to cycle along, walk along with your children after school, things like that. I'm actually a really big user of laneways, and that's how I get to council. I know that I'm a bit unusual in that regard. And I also live right next to a bluestone laneway because I'm very passionate about them. But I do believe that this piece of work will then help us to plan for the future around what our laneway should look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carly Hannon. Councillor Martin?
Yes, following on from Councillor Carly Hannon's comments, I do think that there is a lot of work that we need to do in this space, not only to investigate permeable laneways, but permeable roads, permeable footpaths. We need to start having a conversation about using recycled products as well into the construction of our roads and footpaths. And we also need to have a conversation about accessibility, for people in wheelchairs, people who are mobility inactive. You've got other issues around with just mums pushing prams around. I think there's a huge conversation that we can have in this space. And I think that this report is the first step of a much bigger conversation that we need to have.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Yes, Councillor Tapanos.
I rise to support the officer's recommendation, but also to move adopt point 4. That reads that a further report be prepared for the April Council meeting detailing and analysing various permeable surface options for unmade laneways, including the cycle costs, referencing applicable policies and strategies, particularly our urban head island effect strategy and water sensitive urban design strategies.
Okay, do we have that? Yeah, just give us a moment, Councillor Tapanos, so we can get it on the screen. Councillors, could you have a read of that, please? Particularly the mover and the seconder in the initial.
Can I just clarify, the life cycle costs as in how long the livability of the laneway?
Yeah, I mean, whatever the method of construction would be, it would have a life cycle cost associated with it. So not just the cost of construction for that point in time, but what is the ongoing costs associated.
Yeah, I'm happy with it.
Can I just ask, why April?
Look, it was. I thought 4 months was more than adequate, but I'm happy to remove April and replace it with another month on either side of April.
I've just had word from the CEO they'd be more comfortable with May or June.
Yeah, look, I mean, if that's...
There's a lot in that report.
Yeah, okay, I would be happy to perhaps remove it and leave it to the officer's discretion, if that would make sense. That a further report be prepared for council, that would probably be easier, giving the officer that flexibility.
But we'll aim for that.
Yeah. Could I also ask if it's acceptable to including life cycle costs, recycled product as well? If that's
Sure. If, I'm happy to include that. That could be something that we could have a look at as well.
Is the seconder allowed to move in a clarification of the amendment? Fine, just checking. Okay, all right, so I believe that is being accepted by the mover and the seconder, and so it becomes part of a substantive motion. Okay, all right. Any further discussion on this item? Being no further discussion, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay, DCI 7017, review of pest and weed management policy.
Move an alternative resolution. Which is a simplified version of what I earlier sent around, but I did send this around as well. Okay. Okay, so this is to add a it's up there. So that the guts of it is that the second point is for a report to come back to council after an assessment of the results of the trials of safer organic biodegradable alternatives, outlining options for the phasing out of glyphosate, otherwise known as Roundup.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Do I have a second to Councillor Bolton? No, Councillor Abu. So, yes, Councillor Bolton, you may speak to it now.
Yes, I think, I called, thank you very much to the officers for producing this report and answering some of the questions that I asked in, I think it was a general business or notice of motion earlier this year. I certainly would like to see another further development of that, because I feel that there is quite a strong support in Moreland for going beyond our current policy, which is simply to reduce the amount of glyphosate that's used and move towards a phasing out of glyphosate. Now, I notice in the council report there's reference to hiring someone from Melbourne University to carry out comprehensive trials of bioweed and other sort of natural alternatives to these heavily toxic chemicals. So I think it's only fitting that we wait until those trials are over to make an assessment. But certainly I think we really do need to look at something more stronger than just reducing, because that doesn't indicate what you're wanting to reduce to, but actually looking towards phasing out. I note that some health and safety experts regard Roundup as being the new asbestos for workers who spray Roundup or glyphosate. I think there are some improvements we need to make in Moreland, but I'll wait until the report comes back on the trials before putting forward those improvements, because I am worried about children still play on sports grounds where this stuff is sprayed. There are buffer zones around playgrounds, but not around sports grounds where a lot of children play juniors sport.
Councillor Boot.
Yep. So I sort of expected that a report would come back anyway as a result of this work with the results of the trial. So I have no qualms about supporting that. But also the idea of phasing out the can anybody say that word? Glyphosate. I always want to put another syllable in.
Good enough.
Is one that is easy for me to accept. And we knocked around an idea about how to feed this into this particular report, and I'm happy with this outcome. There's lots of mixed messages about this particular chemical, and I've been told that the World Health Organisation has kind of downgraded the impacts of it, but I think that it's one of those things where it's kind of better if we can just phase it out. And I do note in this report that there are more people saying come and spray our weeds than there are saying, oh my God, they're spraying toxic weeds at my back fence. But these are the kinds of things that people have had conversations with me on the street about, and that's where the notice of motion came from, because not necessarily reporting it to council, but maybe that's because of a feeling of, disempowerment about what to do about these particular chemicals. Something that I do want to also draw to people's attention, and I know that I've mentioned this a few times before, and I've told it to people in the round as well, is that if there are 10 houses in your street and 8 of them are on the do not spray register, there will be no spraying in your street. So I encourage people who are worried about this chemical to get on the do not spray register as soon as possible, and also commend the open space team who've been burning weeds around my neighbourhood. It's not happened lately, obviously, because it's been raining for quite some time, but during winter time there was, on a weekly basis, there were people burning weeds in my street, which is great to see some alternatives are actually being rolled out and evidence of this work being done.
Thank you, Councillor Boo. Councillor Martin?
Can I just ask the mover and seconder if it would be acceptable to add in a date at the after glyphosate at the end there, at the end of point 2, perhaps something like by 2019 or by the end of 18-19 financial year? Is that something that you would consider putting a date that we would like to see this potentially phased out?
By the end, the date by the end.
Okay.
What are the implications?
I feel like I need to see the trials come back. I would like to see certainly a report next year, but I mean, you have to do, I don't know.
Can I get some advice from the officer as well? Thanks.
Through the Mayor, I think Councillor Bolton is right. We really need to see the results of the trial and see what other products are available or the costs of alternative treatments before making a date for the phase out of glyphosate.
All right, so it doesn't appear to be acceptable to the mover or the second?
No, I'm just a bit reluctant without knowing what steps I think we need a plan. Yeah. I think maybe if we, hopefully there'll be a report next year. When are the trials finish or happening?
Through the Mayor, the trials are being, as Councillor Bood said, some things are being trialled now, but some of the work with the university in doing those trials is still being set up. So it will be next year, the report will come back, but I can't say whether it'll be February or November. It will depend on when we get the trials done and the results of the various trials.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, okay, so not being acceptable to the mover and seconder, did you want to move it or are you happy to let it lapse?
I'm happy to let it lapse.
Okay, fine. Okay, all right. Any other further discussion on this topic? Being no further discussion, we'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. All right, we have DCI 7117, road reconstruction of Campbell Street, Coburg, between DeCarl and Barrow Streets, contract number 656T. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Riley. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Bolton?
No.
No. Councillor Riley? No. Any further discussion? No. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. Councillors, that concludes the presentation of office reports. We now move to notices of motion, of which we have 2 tonight. The first one being notice of motion 6417, Public Housing Renewal Program. Councillor Bolton.
So this is a motion to about the Public Housing Renewal Program, of which there's one estate in Moreland, West Brunswick. A, to put a moratorium on the Public Housing Renewal Program, including a halt to relocations until after the parliamentary inquiry. B, make the reports of the Social so this is to write to the
right to those, yeah.
Premier and the various relevant ministers. B, to make reports of the Social Housing Renewal Standing Advisory Committee that have been handed to the Minister public, and that any such reports that are still to be made public immediately. C, to seek the support of other local councils which are concerned about this program for these points.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. That's the motion. Do I have a seconder to that motion? Right. I'm actually happy to second from the chair.
That's good. Thank you very much. I think my reason for moving this motion, so far Moreland Council has taken quite a strong stance on the need to keep public housing publicly owned and not have it privatised. But what is happening right at the moment is that there is a parliamentary inquiry which Moreland Council has made a submission to, which isn't due to report until next year. Meanwhile, residents, tenants, including at Grun Place in West Brunswick, are being bullied into signing relocation agreements without the time to consult a community legal centre, not being left with agreements that they might have been pressured to sign. There is intense stress on every single one of the housing estates that's threatened with this public housing renewal. There is a huge amount of angst, and it is clear from these relocation agreements that people do not have the right to return. It's not a guarantee right. Also, the reports on the reports from the Social Housing Renewal Standing Advisory Committee on the various renewal projects on the various estates which have been handed to the Minister are not being made public. So I just think that information needs to be made public. There's been too much secrecy with this program. Tenants on the housing estates are not being given adequate information, but also some of the residents who live around the estates, including in Peacock Street, West Brunswick, also frustrated that a lot of information has been kept secret from them as well. So this is simply calling for a halt to these forced relocations until after the parliamentary inquiry has reported.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. As a seconder, I'm happy to I think you've said everything that needed to be said. Does any other councillor like to speak to this item?
Just a small typo. Can we just, if this is going to be debated, can we have a comma between Minister and public in B, please, if that's acceptable to the mover and seconder?
I don't think anyone's going to have an issue with a comma. All right, I think that's acceptable, isn't it?
There are many other things I could say.
There are many other things
I could say about the wording of this, but I think I couldn't live with that without that.
Thank you. Thank you. You can take the person out of the primary school classroom, but not the primary school classroom out of the person. All right, thank you. All right. Okay, any further discussion?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Tapagos.
I would not be supporting this motion.
You want a semicolon?
I have more than grammar issues with the motion, which will probably come to no surprise to my fellow councillors. But look, I just want to reiterate once more that you are seeing the state government that is really investing in public housing with this renewal program, and a lot of these public housing facilities are quite run down, and there's been no investment for many, many decades. So what we're actually seeing is quite a positive program. And if you have a look at some of the industries that particularly are speaking out in regards to the fact that they don't want to see this further delay, that sure, there could have been a greater investment, but this is still a welcome investment in public housing in the state of Victoria. And we are talking about levels and financial contributions from the state government which have been unprecedented. So I don't think we should actually be going out there and writing to ministers and actually being against the program, which is quite highly being received by many of the recipients that stand to benefit from it, and many of the residents in the estates. Now, I understand with every program, there might be some concern out there in the community, But I think that those concerns have been alleviated by the state response to this program. And I think that a lot of this sentiments that's being expressed in this motion is probably unfounded.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Councillor Callaghan.
I also rise to speak against this motion. One thing I was taught by my father as a little girl was you can never refuse any kind of public housing because we need every single house that we can get. Now, I do believe that, as Councillor Tapanos has said, that this housing renewal is unprecedented and really, really necessary investment, and we have seen from all of the sector that they want to see this go ahead. In terms of what some of these items in the motion say, Department of Housing has actually said, we are building better, safer and modern housing for residents, and to do this we need to demolish the existing homes to replace them with new homes. The Victorian Government has made a commitment to you that the renewal program will not reduce security of tenure, that you will have the right to return should you choose, and that rent will be capped at 25% of household income. We are doing our best to make sure that relocation process is a partnership to work with you to get the best possible result. We have set up a dedicated relocation team to work with you. We will cover all moving costs and do our best to match you to a new home to the right area while the renewal is going on. The relocation officers will be visiting your estate in November, this is a little bit past, and we'll be meeting with them every step of the way to answer your questions. How quickly you move will depend upon your relocation requirements and the availability of suitable home that can be found for you. Another factor that can affect when you move will be based on whether the estate you live in, where it is, and if the relocation is done in stages. This was put out by the Department of Housing, so unless we as a council are saying that they are lying, I think it's important that we make sure we've got our facts before we put up notices of motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I wasn't going to engage in debate on this one. I agree with the motion that Councillor Bolton has put up. I think some of the language that you've used in the background is slightly inflammatory, and I don't know if I agree with all of it, but I do agree with the motion. I mean, what we have here is the state government giving an incremental increase in housing stock at the cost of privatisation of the land. And what we're leading to is people are genuinely concerned that they've got 2 and 3 bedrooms that they're going to be returned to a 1-bedroom. I mean, there's been no details around the quality of the buildings, the size of the amenity that the residents are going to be returned to. And I do really think that the parliamentary inquiry really needs to look into this because, you know, you don't want to have families, and some of these families share their accommodation together. We need to understand how these people live rather than say, yes, well, we're going to increase the stock, but, you know, you might increase the stock of 1-bedroom apartments. I mean, we don't know this information, and I think it's irresponsible of the state government to really push this along without having a full and open inquiry into the process. So I wasn't going to engage in debate, but I do agree with Councillor Bolton's motion that we do really need to seek more information before we do this, because once you privatise, once you sell this stuff off, we're not getting this land back, and I think it's really important we do it right. And you know, let's not just do an incremental increase. Let's go for 100% increase in our public housing stock. Let's really put our money where our mouth is and really increase that stock. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Riley.
Yes, look, I was also reluctant to rise to speak to this, but I have to now. Well, I'm already on the record for having stood here before and saying that there's been a disinvestment in public housing in this country and in this state for over 2 decades. It started to occur in the 90s, and this is a result. We get this kind of policy rolling out because of it. This, if you do it, there's a cost benefit. There is a little bit of benefit in it, but the cost is way too high for me in terms of what that means in terms of the sell-off of what we consider as public land and public benefit. And I don't think that that cost benefit really does justice to the improvements we're getting. We could actually get much better improvement and investment if the government put more of taxpayers' money into this over the years, but from this year forth, rather than selling off some of that land. So I could say more, but I think I'll restrict my comments to that at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. Any further discussion? Councillor Abood.
Yeah, I just think it's worth acknowledging that we've all sort of spoken in support of a better scenario in terms of whatever's happening with the public housing. And I think all of us have examples of the ways that this has not been done to benefit the people who require the public housing. And certainly my experiences growing up and hanging around Carlton until quite recently when Mum sold the family home a couple of years ago have led me, because it's K Street, which Rathdown Street flats are at the top of that. You know, the 4-storey walk-ups were demolished, and there's just not the same level of public housing that exists now as there was when I was growing up as a kid. And the other thing that I'm noticing, because I live in North Coburg, is the remarkable increase in crime in our neighbourhood. On Saturday morning, my husband went and made us a coffee in the kitchen, looked out the window, everything was fine. Half an hour later he came back, all the car doors were open, everything had been rifled through in our cars, which were unlocked because we're like that. And the people that came in had to come through a big gate and a big fence into a closed yard to do that. And what that actually says to me is there are people who are really suffering in the community, and they're struggling and they're desperate and they're taking chances to get the stuff that the government should be providing. And it's all tied down with public housing and emergency accommodation, and what's being offered as an alternative to better public housing is causing worse conditions for the broader community and the people who require the public housing. So although I also wasn't going to engage, and I'm a little bit reluctant to accept the background because it's pretty harsh language, I do agree that the heart and soul of this notice of motion means well, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Poo. Any further discussion? Did you want to close the debate, Councillor Bolton?
I do. I think this is really important, because if people are forced against their will to relocate before the parliamentary inquiry reports, then it basically means that the facts will be on the ground. It'll be irrelevant what the parliamentary inquiry says. So to me, that is not playing by the rules whatsoever. Especially, you know, there's an intense situation. I am worried about people's health, mental health, especially some of the elderly people, all sorts of people. I have now seen a copy of the relocation agreement, which does not say the things which the Minister is promising. They are not guaranteeing that this will be public land. It says... it's a bit... I understand, you know, one paragraph of the relocation agreement is, I understand that if the redeveloped site is not public housing, the department will negotiate with the community housing organisation. That's not a guarantee in my book. It also says, I will be given the option to return to the redeveloped estate if there is an available dwelling that meets my needs in accordance with the matching clients with housing size guidelines. Well, you know, if the majority of people on the Grun Place estate in West Brunswick are families, because the majority of units are 3-bedroom, they'll be replaced with 1- and 2-bedroom units. So, of course, that means most people will not be allowed to return. If the government was serious about public housing, they'd be investing in public housing, not handing over public land to a private developer. I think, and after 10 years, I understand these community housing associations will have the right to sell the land, sell the units. So this is not guaranteed even social housing with community housing associations in perpetuity. I think, you know, council's position so far has been that it should remain public housing, and I think once the public is gone, then we've got no control. There should be an expansion of public housing, not a shrinking. So I really don't think, you know, the residents of Grun Place and the other states should be bullied out of their housing before the parliamentary inquiry reports.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. It closes the debate, so I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried.
I'd like a division, please.
Division, it's called. Can we put councillors who are in favour? Can you raise your hands again? Those who are in favour. Called by the Deputy Mayor. Yeah. That's correct. And against, could you raise your hands again, please? Okay, you're right. Thank you. We have the second notice of motion, Councillor Bolton, Human Rights and Hindu People, notice of motion 6517.
So I'm moving this motion because we have residents in Moreland who are Rohingya. So the motion is that Council states its support for the Rohingyas' claim to social and political rights and the ability to access humanitarian assistance. 2, calls on the Australian Government to acknowledge that the United Nations concerns about military-led ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya in Myanmar, and calls on the Australian Government to end cooperation with Myanmar's military and impose sanctions on senior military officials involved in these atrocities. And 3, calls on the Australian Government to immediately provide permanent residency and a clear pathway to Australian citizenship for those Rohingya who've sought asylum in Australia.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Is there a seconder? Being no seconder, the motion lapses. Thank you. All right, we move on now, councillors, to general business, of which there is none. Urgent business, of which there is none. And so could I have a motion to close the council meeting to the public in accordance with section 89(2) of the Local Government Act 1989? Moved by Councillor Davidson, seconded by Councillor Abu. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. I now declare the council meeting closed to the public. I'd like to thank the gallery attendees, and as this is the final meeting of the calendar year, I wish all Moreland residents a very happy Christmas and trust the new year will be full of good health and happiness for you, and I respectfully request that the public gallery now make their way out. Thank you so much indeed, and have a good evening.